Oh, this is a good Halloween pinup.
That always
Something's
happens with
hecked
my
up.
heater. Hasn't been running all summer. Turn it on, it burns all of the dust that's been sitting on it.
Okay. Yeah, because I could smell something acrid. So I guess, yeah, it was burning dust or something.
Someone was, I forgot to mention, somebody was, during Halloween, just decided to set off fireworks right next to our house. Stepdad comes in while I'm streaming, and I'm like, right there's, right
They
there.
they did it here too. Not in my complex, but like the adjacent one, I heard fireworks popping. I'm like, is this a tradition now?
I don't think so. I think it's just they're trying to get rid of the excess from 4th of July.
That's not fireworks. That's the joints creaking of a mummy. That's what makes it spooky.
And it's the creaking joints of Siren Head.
Siren Head, does whatever a siren head.
Alright.
That's my song. Hope you
So-
like.
Stoker.
That's
It's
as good as it
silent
gets
like the
tonight.
hill. You made it rhyme. Hey there.
Is Siren Head an SCP?
Night.
Siren Head is an OC created by a horror artist who has become very popular. The OC and the artist.
Okay.
I believe they post under the username of Slimy Swamp Ghost or something like that.
I mean, I looked at that thing. I thought, oh, that's got to be an SCP.
I mean, I'm sure someone's written up an SCP about it at this point. It's a very popular thingamawhatsit. Who's in the
Oh, we're
company?
live.
Yes, we
Oh,
are.
are we live?
Oh! The SCP Foundation has, like, rules against, like, using pre-existing horror things. Because the most famous one they have, which is 137, which is that weird peanut-looking thing that, like, look at it. That one was, like, a pre-existing piece of art, and then someone wrote a story around it. So I wonder if they do something similar with Siren Head, where it's just like, hey, here's this creepy giant siren-headed zombie skeleton thing. Let's write a story about it.
Oh. Does anyone mind if I do Tailypo?
No, why not? I did it last year.
Boxer suggested it, and I love this one.
Tailypo is a lot of fun, and there are like
Anyway.
a million and one variations on it. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you enjoy our lovely fireplace and our we built it ourselves between streams last week. We have a request in the chat that we place the links to the stories in the chat when we start reading them, so that at least one of our members can read along more easily.
Okay.
So, yeah, we've already got 14 people in here. That's like 13, but with one more, so it's even spookier.
Good one.
It's like 13 and Casper.
It's like 13. So, where do we begin?
Okay.
Do we do it like we do last time, or do you want to mix it up tonight?
I will mention one thing. I do have a special creepypasta that I wrote.
Ooh,
Yes,
nice.
I was supposed to help you with that, and then didn't.
Yeah, and you failed. Yeah. Anyway, whoever wants to go first, we can just go in roster order. I mean, whatever.
Why don't we just do that, since that's what we're used to at this point?
Okay.
Indeed. Alright. I got one for us tonight. Alright, so submit for your approval for the Midnight Society. I give you. I investigate disturbing cases. Here are my stories. The Hermit. Written by Brian A. Young. There's a famous quote by Robert Evans. There are 3 sides to the story. Yours... Oh wait, I forgot to link to the... Yeah, I'll link it for everybody in chat. There's a famous quote by Robert Evans. There are 3 sides to a story. Yours, mine, and the truth. In my line of work, you come to realize that the truth is rarely an objective perspective. For example, a bloody fight is the result of an argument. One side claims self-defense, the other claims a brutal attack. A camera shows a man striking another in the heat of a moment. Case closed, right? The truth is stored in that digital medium, of course. No. When you look further, what do you find? A lifelong friendship, betrayal, months of tension, threats. A boil over. Maybe the attacker truly believed his life was in danger and mistook the slightest movement as the beginning of a punch. Perhaps he just let his anger at the situation get the best of him. Maybe a mix of both. What's the objective truth here, and for whom is that truth valid? When you're a cop, understanding these nuances in truth is critical.
GC,
That is even more...
GC, can you hold on a second?
Sure.
This story looks extremely long.
Says it's only
Does it?
22 minutes.
It read out loud says it's 6,000 words long. That's like 50 minutes.
What's that?
All right. Anything else we got?
Oh. Okay.
I got a bunch of stuff in the pool. I mean, I could throw you one if you want, GC.
Sure. Toss me in there.
Yeah.
All right,
Especially
hang
since
on.
this is one we read last year. I'm not incentivized to spend a long time on it.
Okay, give me 1 second. Trying to find one that's you might like.
I think its estimated reading time is for reading by yourself silently, but reading out loud takes at least twice as long.
Okay. I never actually read it back to myself, honestly, but it looked doable. But okay, we can try that. Let's see. Where's the link?
The link to what? Oh, I'm still trying to find one that. I'm trying to. Sorry, give me a second.
Okay, sorry.
You kind of caught me off guard.
Here's one that you could have.
Okie dokie. Okay. Let's do it then. Alright, 1 second, folks. I'll post this one in chat. Alright. Let us post the old story and pull out the old stone totem as we read out for this approval of the Midnight Society, Toys in the Attic. Written by Nate J82. Christmas has always been a hard time for me. Childhood memories of bickering relatives, drunken trades, and hostile dinner conversations made me wince at the mere mention of the holiday. In the Christmas of 1989, I broke my collarbone on a new toboggan. In the Christmas of 1997, my brother drove the family car in a lamppost. In the Christmas of 2000, my grandmother set the kitchen ablaze while attempting to cook a turkey. But it wasn't until the Christmas of 2008 that a real tragedy occurred. Jennifer and I met in the fall of 2002, engaged in the winter of 2004, and married in the summer of 2006. She gave birth to our son, Noah, in the spring of 2008. This was our first Christmas together as a family. It was a beautiful new model home with a quiet neighborhood in a peaceful little town. It was just a few days before Christmas where we broke in. I was staying late at the office before locking up for the holidays. He didn't take anything. He didn't move a single thing out of place. He just walked upstairs and went after her. The police called in the most senseless and animalistic act they ever heard and seen. And somehow, with her blood painting the walls, they still never managed to find the monster who did it, and would never know why it happened. This year was never going to be a new start for us. Despite the Scrooge-like demeanor I developed every year at this time, Noah loved Christmas. When I was 8 years old, he didn't have much to say. But everything he did say had to do with stories of Santa, elves, and reindeer. The little scoundrel was a lot better sleuth than he was a conversationalist. Last year, he managed to find his Christmas presents behind my tool bench in the garage. This year, his presents weren't going into the attic where I knew he couldn't get to them. The mid-century home we purchased after Jennifer's passing had much older integrated attic stairs than our old home did. I had just finished packing the Christmas presents while in that dusty old attic when I realized it was time for a school bus to be dropping them off. As I pushed the heavy attic staircase up, I had smirking with satisfaction. That child was not making his way up those steps. It was December 11th. Christmas Day was still 2 weeks away. My parents weren't arriving until the 18th. The holiday shopping was done, and school was now out until January. So Noel and I were going to have a few days of holiday bonding all to ourselves. This might have been the first Christmas in many years I would truly get to enjoy. 5 nights ago, Noah stayed up a little later watching holiday specials on television, and he went to sleep around 8:30, and I went to bed shortly after. It wasn't until 11 o'clock when I first heard those light footsteps scattering across the hall. I suddenly became alert, and the footsteps stopped at my door. I sat up, and the door slowly began to creak open. It was Noah. I was put at ease at the sight of him. I was a little alarmed that he was up this late. He never stayed up past 9 o'clock, let alone wandering onto my room at this time. Noah, what are you doing out of my bed this late? Dad, you believe in Santa Claus? What? Do you? I was taken a little off guard with the question, but I decided to put his mind at ease. Yes, of course I believe in Santa Claus. Why do you ask? Okay, that's good, because he needs to know that we believe in him. I know, Noah. Now, go back to bed. He smiled before closing the door. I heard his footsteps scattering back down the hall in his bedroom as I quickly drifted off to bed, sleep. 4 nights ago, Noah and I were making Christmas cards for the relatives who would be arriving the following days. We had construction paper, glitter, scissors, and glue. It was quite a messy scene, but I thought he deserved to have a little fun on his first day of vacation. After finishing up the cards, I began to gather them all up and look them over with Noah. There's one from Grandpa and Grandma, one from Uncle John, and I paused at the sight of a card addressed to no one in the family. Who's this card for, Noah? It's a Santa Claus. We'd really be happy if we made a card for him, too. I smirked as Noah's thoughtfulness and added it to the pile. Later that night, I was awoken by a crashing noise. Suddenly I heard the footsteps sputtering towards my room again with more urgency. Noah, this is the second time in a row. You still believe in Santa, right? Yes, I already told you that yesterday. Okay. I don't think Santa knows that, but thanks. Noah, what was that crashing noise I just heard? Noah shrugged his shoulders in ignorance and scurried back to his room. I was too tired to argue with him. Probably just imagining it. I drifted back to sleep. 3 nights ago, I was sitting in front of the television watching a football game with Noah was drawing his crayons beside me. During breaks, I became increasingly curious as to what he was drawing. When he left the room, I picked it up and realized it wasn't a drawing. List. Hey, Noah, is this your list of Santa Claus? Yeah, Santa Claus told me I had to write one. Do you think you can mail it to him in time? No, I can just leave it here. He knows when I want to because he's magic. I nodded at the flawless logic and handed it back to him. Later that night, I heard the scruffing of footsteps across the hall again. I was growing impatient with Noah's sleep cycle, but I was still awake reading at this time anyways. But he didn't come into my room that night. He just stood in front of the door for a moment and ran back to his room. 2 nights ago, I decided to sit down with Noah and ask him about his late-night wanderings. He suddenly became nervous when asked. When he finally uttered that he was waiting for Santa to come with a sleigh and reindeer, I couldn't help but smile at this. Santa wouldn't come until Christmas, though, Noah. We got a few more days to wait. He seemingly brushed my statement off and made an odd request. Could we leave some milk and cookies for him when he gets hungry? I was going to argue with him. It just made him a big deal. Alright, but if we do, you have to promise to stay in your bed after bedtime, okay? He nodded excitedly, but he didn't seem as happy about Santa's arrival as he did a few days ago. I guessed he was getting burnt down from long waiting for so long. Later that night, the scurrying of footsteps began again. At first, they were faint, but they headed straight to my room. I was more than a little upset at this point as my door opened. Noah, I thought I told you to stay in bed. He came and ate them, Dad. What? The milk and cookies. Santa came. I marched down and had to admit I was surprised to see the milk and cookies gone. But that wasn't a difficult trick to pull off either. I was done with this game. Noah, Santa isn't coming back until next week, and if you keep making up stories and getting out of bed, he's not coming at all. Do you understand? Noah's face turned to tears as he ran back to his room and shut the door. I didn't want to be so mean, but there was only so much foolishness I could take at this time. Last night, things got really weird. Noah did not speak to me for most of the day. I finally apologized and told him just to stop making up stories. He seemed to be focusing elsewhere, though. I didn't like to disrespect the attitude he was developing. Would you like to tell the truth about who ate the milk and cookies last night? He just pouted at me with an angry look. He ran back to his room and came back with a folded piece of construction paper. I thought this was an apology. That was until he spoke. This is a card from Santa. He told me to give this to you. I finally lost it. I just took the card and crumpled it up without even bothering to read it. I threw it in the trash bin right in front of Noah. Noah, I don't know what's gotten into you, but Christmas is going to be canceled if you don't stop these stupid little games. What'd you want from me? I want my mom and dad back together. He once again rushed off to his room in tears, and I felt guilty for managing to make him cry twice in 2 days. He never really talked about his mother. He had every right to be upset now that he was older and was beginning to understand her absence. I let him cool down for a while, and I decided to let him sleep in my room, both to comfort him and keep an eye on him. It wasn't until 11 o'clock last night that he once again woke up. Dad, it's time. I was angry being woken at this hour, but decided to be patient with Noah. Time for what, Noah? Santa has a surprise waiting for us downstairs. I was beginning to get a little nervous at Noah's illusions, but I finally decided to play along. Noah dragged me downstairs into the living room, and when I saw myself, I quickly became scared for a different reason altogether. The tree was lit up, and all the presents in the attic were laid out in front around the tree. Noah, how'd you get these downstairs? Or how'd you get these down here? I didn't do it, Dad. Santa did. The hair on my back began to stand on end. There was no way Noah could have lifted all those gifts or even got to the attic to find them. And how did Santa get into the attic to get them? Noah turned to me and meekly replied, He's been living up there all week, Dad. Made a promise to keep it a secret. My jaw dropped as I tried to remain cool. Is Santa still in the house? Noah paused for a moment for an answer. No, he said he had to leave after you found your surprise, and after you read his letter. My breathing came heavy as I started to panic at fear. I rushed across the house towards the wastebasket, and I pulled up the crumpled letter I'd thrown down there earlier and opened it. The front of the letter was written in eloquent handwriting. All you want for Christmas. I slowly opened the inside the letter, and I almost burst into tears at the sight of it. It was a picture of Jennifer and me, taken days before her death. Written in blood across the picture was, Together as then, soon. Hands were shaking. I couldn't even move. He was back. He was going to finish what he started. On the back of the card there was no blood. There was no ominous message. Just one simple line. Ho, ho, ho.
Ho,
You know-
ho.
Oh,
Call me crazy.
You're crazy.
Oh, thank you.
You better watch
Okay.
out. You better watch out. You better watch out. You better watch out.
I have a
He's-
sneaking suspicion that wasn't actually Santa Claus.
He sees you when you're sleeping. Okay.
Be good, for goodness sake.
Yeah, that song is absolutely not a happy song about Saint Kringle.
it was secretly Colonel Mustard with the knife in the attic.
It was Colonel Mustard.
Colonel Mustard
Alright.
in the attic with the letter.
Mm.
Okay. So Boxer requested this one. It's traditional. It's called Tailypo. It's from the Appalachians, and we indeed did it last year. But you know what? It's a good one, so I'm going to do it. Submit for the approval of the Midnight Society. This is Tailypo. There was an old man who lived alone in the middle of the forest. He must have been 60 years old if he was a day, but nobody knew his real name. Most folks just called him Old Jake. He had 3 loyal hunting dogs that kept him company on the long, lonely nights. Their names were Ino, Uno, and Calico. He lived in an old cabin he had built himself, way back in the deep, dark woods. It wasn't very big, but it was enough for him and his dogs. The cabin had only one room in it, and that was his bedroom, his living room, his dining room, and his kitchen. At one end of the room, there was a nice big open fireplace where he could cook his supper and warm his bones on the cold winter nights. Old Jake loved hunting, fishing, and the great outdoors. He had a little garden where he planted vegetables, and he would go out every day to hunt for rabbits and fish. During the warm months, there was more than enough food to go around, but in the colder months it was hard to keep his belly full. One cold winter night, the old man's stomach was grumbling, but there was nothing to eat in the cupboards but a few moldy potatoes. He stoked the fire in the fireplace to keep the cabin warm, and he went to bed. He was just about to fall asleep when he heard something in the room. He opened his eyes just in time to see a shadow creeping across the wall. When he sat up in bed and peered into the darkness, his eyes grew wide in terror. Sitting across the room from him was the weirdest-looking creature he had ever seen. It was short and stubby, with pointed ears and bright yellow eyes that seemed to burn with some strange fire. Its body was covered in black fur and had big sharp claws and a long, thick tail. For a moment, Jake just sat there, frozen in fear. He stared at the hideous creature, and it stared back at him. Then, quick as a flash, he grabbed his hunting knife and lunged at the thing. It sprang up and scurried out the hole and clawed in the cabin wall. The thing was fast, but so was Jake. A split second before it escaped, he brought his knife down squarely on the big tail and cut it off. The creature let a horrible screech and disappeared into the night. Old Jake was left standing there with the long, thick tail in one hand and a bloody knife in the other. Jake was about to throw the tail outside when his stomach started rumbling again. He was famished with the hunger, so he took the tail, cleaned it, cooked it, and ate it for his supper. It tasted a bit strange, but there was a lot of it and it was very chewy. In fact, it tasted kind of like chicken. With his stomach full, old Jake plugged up the hole in his cabin wall with some old rags and newspapers. Then he got back into bed and drifted off to sleep. He hadn't been asleep for very long before he was awakened by a strange noise. It sounded like something trying to scratch its way into the cabin. The old man thought that if he stayed really quiet, the thing might go away. He could hear it scratch, scratch, scratch. But then a strange voice outside hissed, "Tailypo! Tailypo! I want my Tailypo!" He thought he must be imagining things, but then he heard it again. "Tailypo! Tailypo! I want my Tailypo!" Old Jake jumped out of bed, ran to the front door and threw it open. He called out to his dogs, "I know, you know, Calico, get over here." The dogs, they came tearing up to the cabin and ran around, barking and sniffing and snarling, couldn't find a thing. Jake shrugged his shoulders and went back to bed again. He was just about to drift off to sleep when he heard the noise again. This time, the scratching sounded like it was at the window. Whatever it was, it really, really wanted to get in. But the scratching seemed to be on two walls at the same time. Then he heard the strange voice again, and this time it hissed a little louder. "Tailypo! Tailypo! Where is my Tailypo?" Old Jake, who wasn't one to frighten easily, was getting a little shaky. This was getting really weird. So he eased to the window and called, "I know, you know, Calico! Come on over here and see what this scratching is in my house." The three dogs bounded up to the porch and they sniffed around and barked and sniffed, but they never found anything at all. Jake decided to stay up for the rest of the night to protect himself, his dogs, and his little cabin. So he pulled up a chair next to the fireplace, grabbed a blanket from the bed, and settled in for the rest of the wind-chill wintry night. Sleep soon overtook him, and once again he dozed off. It was almost dawn when Jake woke with a start. The sound of scratching seemed to reverberate from every area of the cabin. Jake searched frantically for his axe, his rifle, or something to defend himself with, but he was so frightened that he couldn't find anything. The scratching grew louder and louder and louder. "Tailypo! Tailypo! Give me back my Tailypo!" Jake yelled back, "Leave me alone! I got your Tailypo!" Then he called his dogs, but this time the dogs didn't come. He waited and waited, but still not one dog came running. Jake had never been so scared in his life. He ran to his bed and jumped in. The scratching in the voice grew louder and louder and louder. "Tailypo! Tailypo! Give me back my Tailypo!" Jake yelled back as loud as he could, "I ain't got no Tailypo, so why don't you leave me alone and go on about your business? I ain't never hurt nobody or nothing. Just leave me alone." The scratching seemed to be inside the house now, and the voice was so loud it was deafening. "Tailypo! Tailypo! You took my Tailypo! Now I'm back to get it! Give it back to me now!" Jake pulled the cover up over his head and stayed as quiet as he could, but now the scratching was in his room. "Tailypo! Tailypo! You better give me back my Tailypo!" Jake then felt the thing scratching up the bottom of the bed and onto the cover. Jake eased the cover down to see what was steadily approaching. Then he saw it. A short, stubby creature with pointed ears, fat feet with long claws and bloodshot red eyes that glowed in the dark. Eyes that seemed to burn straight through Jake. Before he could pull the cover over his head again, the thing pounced on his chest, looked straight down and said, "You got my Tailypo, and you better give it back to me now." Jake yelled, "I ate it! I ate your Tailypo, it's gone!" And that thing started to scratch and claw and tear away at poor old Jake, trying to get that Tailypo back. Jake tried to fight back, but that thing was too strong and those claws were too sharp. Jake's screams echoed through the dark mountains, then stopped, leaving a chilling silence. After a month or two, without hearing from old Jake, the townspeople got worried and came looking for him. They hiked up the mountain and through the forest, but when they reached his cabin, they found it had been torn to shreds. There was no sign of Jake or the dogs. They searched the woods and called out to them, "Jake, I know, you know, Calico," but there was no answer. Old Jake and his dogs were never seen again. The townspeople say that if you are all alone out there at night and you listen carefully, you can hear a strange voice calling on the wind.
Tailypo, Tailypo. Now I got my Tailypo.
The way you chose to voice that is cracking me up so much.
Where's
I
my
know-
Tailypo?
You know, I know that, like, obviously it's supposed to be, traditionally it would be Tailypo, but I thought, no, let's take that another direction. Let's do like John Davis from Korn, you know, just like
Let's
talking,
do Scave and Tailypo.
just go a mile a minute.
Man thing has Tailypo. Give me back Tailypo.
It's
I
just,
mean, it was
I'm,
was either
I'm
that or-
so amused by this.
it was either that or Andy Serkis.
God,
And-
has he ever read Tailypo? He so should.
Yeah, right. Anyway, I yield the floor.
Alright. Give me just 1 second. I have found a story for us. From the collection of stories that I read when I was a kid that I got most of my scary stories from. This is Harold from Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark 3. Let me paste that link. Alright. When it got hot in the valley, Thomas and Alfred drove their cows up to a cool green pasture in the mountains to graze. Usually they stayed there with the cows for 2 months. Then they brought them down to the valley again. The work was easy enough, but it was boring. All day, the 2 men tended their cows. At night, they went back to the tiny hut where they lived. They ate supper and worked in the garden and went to sleep. It was always the same. Then, Thomas had an idea that changed everything. "Let's make a doll, the size of a man," he said. "It would be fun to make. We could put it in the garden to scare the birds." "It should look like Harold," Alfred said. Harold was a farmer they both hated. They made a doll out of old sacks stuffed with straw. They gave it a pointy nose like Harold's and tiny eyes like his. Then they added dark hair and a twisted frown. Of course, they also gave it Harold's name. Each morning on their way to the pasture, they tied Harold to a pole in the garden to scare away the birds. Each night they brought him inside so that he wouldn't get ruined if it rained. When they were feeling playful, they would talk to him. One of them might say, "How are the vegetables growing today, Harold?" Then the other, making believe he was Harold, would answer in a crazy voice, "Very slowly." They would both laugh, but not Harold. Whenever something went wrong, they took it out on Harold. They would curse at him, even kick or punch him. Sometimes one of them would take the food they were eating, which they both were sick of, and smear it on the doll's face. "How do you like this stew, Harold?" he would ask. "Well, you better eat it, or else." And the 2 men would howl with laughter. One night, after Thomas had wiped Harold's face with food, Harold grunted. "Did you hear that?" Alfred asked. "It was Harold," Thomas said. "I was watching him when it happened." "I can't believe it." "How could he grunt?" Alfred asked. "He's just a sack of straw. It's not possible." "Let's throw him in the fire," Thomas said, "and that will be that." "Let's not do anything stupid," said Alfred. "We don't know what's going on. When we move the cows down, we'll leave him behind. For now, let's just keep an eye on him." So they left Harold sitting in the corner of the hut. They didn't talk to him or take him outside anymore. Now and then the doll grunted, but that was all. After a few days, they decided there was nothing to be afraid of. Maybe a mouse or some insects had gotten inside Harold and were making those sounds. So Thomas and Alfred went back to their old ways. Each morning they put Harold out in the garden, and each night they brought him back into the hut. When they felt playful, they joked with him. When they felt mean, they treated him as badly as ever. Then one night Alfred noticed something that frightened him. "Harold is growing," he said. "I was thinking the same thing," Thomas said. "Maybe it's just our imagination," Alfred replied. "We have been up here on this mountain for too long." The next morning, they were eating. Harold stood up and walked out of the hut. He climbed up on the roof and trotted back and forth like a horse on its hind legs. All day, all night, he trotted like that. In the morning, Harold climbed down and stood in a far corner of the pasture. The men had no idea what he would do next. They were afraid. They decided to take the cows down into the valley that same day. When they left, Harold was nowhere in sight. They felt as if they had escaped a great danger and began joking and singing. But when they had gone only a mile or two, they realized they had forgotten to bring their milking stools. Neither one wanted to go back for them, but the stools would cost a lot to replace. Really is nothing to be afraid of, they told one another. After all, what could a doll do? They drew straws to see which one would go back. It was Thomas. I'll catch up with you, he said, and Alfred walked down toward the valley. When Alfred came to a rise in the path, he looked back for Thomas. He did not see him anywhere, but he did see Harold. The doll was on the roof of the hut again. As Alfred watched, Harold kneeled and stretched out a bloody skin to dry in the sun. That's it, short and sweet.
But if that was Harold, then who was phone? Sorry. It may get old for other people, it doesn't get old for me.
Some things, good stuff never gets old.
God, I must be thinking of these stories with some rose-tinted glasses, because apparently that was supposed to be the best story out of all 3 books.
Really?
And that seemed mediocre at best.
Well, I mean, you know, it's this stuff.
I mean, yes, it's school children horror. I guess.
Yeah.
I guess that's the idea, right?
That's
Well, the other
basically-
thing is, the stories are one thing, but isolated from the illustrations.
Yeah.
That's
Because
true.
the
illustrations
are the illustrations are the true nightmare fuel of scary stories to tell in the dark.
Yeah. God, I should do commissions like that.
My God, I would be all over that, Jonas.
Jonas is like, it's Junji Ito week. Everyone, body horror.
It's your commission. It was made for you. Okay.
Have you seen Junji Ito's Halloween video where he's wearing the cat ears?
No, I haven't.
It's very good. Junji Ito is a cat boy, confirmed.
All right.
Anyway, I think it's Rick's turn.
Okay.
Okay. Unfortunately, this one does not have a publicly available text for anybody to read, but this is from the book Ichor Falls by Kris Straub, 3 miles up a narrow dirt road. Leighton had given up on his garden faster than he'd given up on other hobbies, pastimes, occupations, acquaintances, friends. He'd started one out of sheer boredom of living out here, in farmland considered secluded even for the falls. His closest neighbors seemed to glean some kind of satisfaction from tending small gardens. They were at least 3 miles down the narrow dirt road in either direction, which he liked. Contrasted with the depth of Leighton's other emotions, like was an ocean. This garden, if it could be called that now or ever, had yielded nothing. A few stark white shoots that dried yellow and wrinkled, countless weeds, and in the far corner nearest the back of the house by the rustling water meter, one sad green tomato immediately beset upon by caterpillars. He ran his fingers through what was left of his gray hair and considered pulling up all the plants, but it was a thought that had come to him many times in the past, never acted upon. Let the earth do what it will, he thought. Leighton's existence was both bleak and self-applied. He had a life once, known people once. A child of stern upbringing, he had worked as a material scientist and metallurgist for an iron ore refinery up in Point Pleasant for 40-odd years, and took early retirement. He attempted to teach physics to high school students for a year or so, but he had no interest in imparting knowledge to those too stubborn to receive it. There was something pathetic, infuriating about the youth today and their parents, the people of Point Pleasant, or anywhere really. People got on Leighton's nerves. Sometimes he couldn't understand how anyone could stand to be part of the world. Ichor Falls was a dim town, a gray town, which appealed to him. The locals kept to themselves, and in all the time he'd lived out here, he never considered himself one of them. The mist gave him a good, cold feeling. From this distance, he could barely even make out the lights of the highway. The feeling was broken, often by a local newspaper delivery. The man parked his truck further south where the dirt wasn't so soft and walked the 300 yards up to Leighton's mailbox. He kept thinking one of these days he'd have to move it further away from the house, as it is around this time of day he tried to be inside so as to avoid small talk. But here Leighton was, standing outside, staring at his garden. He set his jaw. The delivery man waved a long wave as he came closer with a stack of ads Leighton had no interest in reading. "Morning, Leighton!" "Morning." "Last stop of the day. Always good to see you. Means my shift is over." He had made that joke too many times to count. "Just in the box, please." "No time for chit-chat, huh? Something you gotta get back to?" "I enjoy my solitude. I wish you'd respect that," Leighton said. Already moving towards his front door, he stopped and turned back to the man. "And if all you have me for is advertising, then make your last stop somewhere else." "You want us to suspend delivery, then? I can put in the form for you, but you'll have to sign it." Leighton responded by angrily slamming his front door. This was his never-ending experience with others. No matter what steps you took to be left alone, it intruded. It persisted. Wasn't it obvious from the way he acted, Leighton thought, what his desires were? From the company he didn't keep, from the places he refused to live, from the state of his garden? He had a house full of journals and books to read. What could be more simple or more easily carried out than to leave another man completely alone? The next morning, Leighton awoke to the sensation that something had changed. For the better. As he dressed, he couldn't place it. Perhaps he had slept better the night before, or perhaps it was as simple as giving the newspaper man a piece of his mind. Speaking of which, he wondered if the paper would be cluttering his doorstep this morning. He opened the front door. No sign of the paper, and it would have been here by now. Looking across his land, he felt like the lights of the highway were dimmer somehow, more distant, less of a reminder of the clutter and pointlessness beyond it. Then he heard the sound of an engine on his road. As it drifted closer, it became unmistakable. The newspaper delivery truck. Leighton debated staying inside, but decided to have it out with the delivery man once and for all. Up the dirt road came the man carrying his bundle of insipid gossip. Leighton didn't give him time to call out a good morning. "You turn around and get back in your truck, son! I told you I'm not interested!" he shouted. The man reacted as if he had heard a far-off noise and craned his neck to hear it. "Leighton?" he called back. "Yes, Leighton, the one who doesn't want your rag. I don't care if you have to sign that form for me. I won't accept another paper." The man, still holding the newspaper, had a very confused look and squinted into the mist. He looked as if he was going to speak, but instead he turned around as if realizing something, then moved quickly back to his truck, which was actually difficult for Leighton to see in the heavy mist. He turned to his front door and found it a little slick from all the mist, he thought. He gripped it tighter and pushed it open with some difficulty. Walking through his living room, he found that even the floor seemed wet or slick in some way, even though there was no visible moisture. It was a slickness or slippery quality unlike any he had felt before, and it was no better when he stepped onto the carpeted floor. He thought he could feel it where his clothing touched his skin as well, and believed it to be humidity or moisture until he picked up a soft-covered novel from the bookshelf, and actually found it difficult to hold. He pinched a single page between thumb and forefinger, but the slickness remained, in addition to another sensation, or lack of it. He couldn't feel the roughness of the paper page, or the book's smooth cover, or the wood of the bookshelf, or his own clothing. It was as though he now interacted with everything through a thick, lukewarm, invisible, oily curtain. This feeling invaded his touch, his hearing, his sight, like a fog rolling in off the lake. The world was turning gray and quiet and slick. Now Leighton soundlessly slipped on the rug and hit the floor face first, sliding halfway across his living room floor. He felt none of it. His body had gone completely numb. He could still move freely, but without any kind of functional traction or sensation, he had been reduced to merely observing himself flop on the ground, a pair of eyes and a nerveless, man-shaped jellyfish out of water. "Am I having a stroke?" appeared in his terror-stricken thoughts, and suddenly found himself screaming for help, but the sound issuing from his throat was wrong. In his mind he was saying help, but the word came out as distant, quiet series of clicks. He got hold of himself there on the floor and reached up to grip the horizontal slats on the back of the wooden chair. He folded his arms around the top slat, and though he slid wildly back and forth, he was able to brace himself up to a kneeling position and hold his legs together. He turned his head to gaze into a hallway mirror. In the mirror was a faint impression of a naked man seated on the floor. Leighton's clothing had all but slid off him in the panic. They lay around him, not slick or wet, but as if discarded by a misbehaving child. He was very aware of the sharp pressure of the slat in the crook of his elbow as he hung there, twisting idly, craning his head this way and that, as if a solution would present itself if he looked hard enough. But as he braced himself there, even that pressure at his elbow began to fade. Sitting here perfectly still, it was now impossible to know the position of his body at all without looking. Leighton felt disoriented, but not dizzy or tired or hurt. His mind raced. He cast his gaze at the telephone on the end table, beside the couch, not more than 10 feet away, but completely unreachable. Whatever this numbness was, he knew he wasn't injured physically. Maybe this was a stroke, or an embolism, something that wouldn't wait for help. Still have control over my body, even though it doesn't feel like it, he reasoned to calm himself. I'm not sliding on anything. Something's weakened me. I can still reach the phone and dial it. I can crawl. Lane carefully released his hold on the chair, having to trust his memories and guesses of what that felt like, as his body registered no feeling whatsoever now. He was aware of everything he should be feeling, but wasn't. Even the sound of the unsteadied chair tapping its arm on the underside of the table was fading. In minutes, Layton would be completely deaf. To his surprise, Layton suddenly found his point of view sideways, his naked arms spread out to his sides on the floor. He had fallen. He must have landed flat on his stomach, hard, but he felt nothing. The transition from vertical to horizontal hadn't even registered. Dizziness, adrenaline from loss of balance, the sound and jarring sting of impact, all cues were gone. Gonna bring my left arm over my head and crawl on my belly, Layton strained, hoping that his vision wouldn't leave before he dialed 911. He could do this, he thought. Indeed, he watched as his left arm slid slowly over, his hand now pointing somewhere in the direction of the phone. Now all he had to do was pull. He had no idea how long this would take him, but little by little, he promised himself he would get to that telephone. He felt some surge of relief as he noticed his viewpoint lift slightly from the floor to one some inches above it. I'm doing it. I'm lifting my head. His field of view increased as he rose himself off the floor. The expanse of carpet no longer dominated the right half of his sight. Here he was 2, 3, now 5 inches off the floor. Lane could not tell if he was smiling, nor could he tell if the smile had fallen when he realized that the left half of his sight was now filled with the off-white, ragged plane of the stucco ceiling. Lane's numb body bobbed gently on the ceiling, like a half-filled gray balloon. He still had control of his eyes, and looking down at the carpet some 6 or 7 feet below him, his limbs not hanging from his torso, but unguided, buoyant in the air, weightless. Looking directly at a bent leg, he realized he could see through it to the chair below, as if his body was becoming immaterial. Hours passed, or days, months, years. His vision had long dimmed to a polite gray blur, leaving Layton alone with only a roaring, panicked mind, incorporeal and twisting in the dark, screaming. "Appreciate you making the trip up here," said the delivery man. "I knew he'd prefer to be left alone and all, but something about our last exchange?" "Understandable," the officer said, looking around the front room one last time. "Probably not the best idea for an old man to live so far out in the country where he could fall down, hurt himself or worse." Another policeman rapped on the doorframe before poking his head in. "There's no sign of anything out here. Nothing suspicious, anyway. Seems like he just wandered off." "There's our answer, as much as we need of one as we need," said the first officer to the delivery man. "We'll see if anyone's caught sight of him." "Hope he hasn't gotten himself hurt," the delivery man said. "Well, you did the right thing to tell us," said the officer. "He's lucky you gave enough of a damn to check on him. You make that much noise about not needing the world, sometimes the world decides it doesn't need you either."
You know, I was expecting the ending to be like, "and he was dead," but like, that was a little bit more existential.
You know, the thing was, the character's name was Layton, and I couldn't stop picturing Professor Layton.
Well, Jonas
He got very jaded in his elder years.
Didn't you know that this is the canon ending of the Professor Layton franchise?
Yeah.
All right.
That was a good one.
That is a good one. I like these Ichor Fall things.
Hmm.
I wish Ichor was pronounced Ichor, though. Ichor seems so much more fitting.
Stoker, if you want
a
to
horror author.
if you want to say Ichor, I support you.
Okay, fine, I did.
All right, good.
And now I'm waiting for my PC to respond.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, it's like that one famous horror writer. What was his name? Stoker Bramul.
Stoker
Oh yes, Stoker Bramul. He wrote about vampires in Sweden. all right.
Sweden, vegan, fucking vegan. Okay.
So, my next story is an old school, well, fairly old school. I don't know exactly how old it is, but I first heard it several years ago. This creepypasta I had completely forgotten about until I was reminded of it by a game we streamed recently. The name of this one is Pale Luna, and it is attributed to a writer named Mikhail Honoridez, I don't know, however you pronounce it, but this is Pale Luna. In the last decade and a half, it's become infinitely easier to obtain exactly what you're looking for, and by way of a couple of keystrokes. The internet has made it all too simple to use a computer to change reality. An abundance of information is merely a search engine away, to the point where it's hard to imagine life as any different. Yet, a generation ago, when the words streaming and torrent were meaningless save for conversations about water, people met face-to-face to conduct software swap parties, trading games and applications on Sharpie-labeled 5.25-inch floppies. Of course, most of the time the meets were a way for frugal, community-minded individuals to trade popular games like King's Quest and Maniac Mansion amongst themselves. However, a few early programming talents designed their own computer games to share amongst their circle of acquaintances, who, in turn, would pass it on until, if fun and well-designed enough, an independently developed game had its place in the collection of aficionados across the country. Think of it as the 80s equivalent of a viral video. Pale Luna, on the other hand, was never circulated outside of the San Francisco Bay Area. All known copies have long been disposed of, all computers that have ever run the game now detritus buried under layers of filth and polystyrene. This fact is attributed to a number of rather abstruse design choices made by its programmer. Pale Luna was a text adventure in the vein of Zork and The Lurking Horror, at a time when said genre was swiftly going out of fashion. Upon booting the program, the player was presented with a screen almost completely blank, except for the text, "You are in a dark room. Moonlight shines through the window. There is gold in the corner, along with a shovel and a rope. There is a door to the east. Command?" So began the game that one writer for a long out-of-print fanzine described as enigmatic, nonsensical, and completely unplayable. As the only commands that the game would accept were pick up gold, pick up shovel, pick up rope, open door, and go east, the player was soon presented with the following. Reap your reward. Pale Luna smiles at you. You are in a forest. There are paths to the north, west, and east. Command? What quickly infuriated the few who've played the game was the confusing and buggy nature of the second screen onward. Only one of the directional decisions would be the correct one. For example, on this occasion, a command to go in a direction other than north would lead to the system freezing, requiring the operator to hard reboot the entire computer. Further, any subsequent screens seem to merely repeat the above text, with the difference being only the directions available. Worse still, the standard text adventure commands appeared to be useless. The only accepted non-movement related prompts were use gold, which caused the game to display the message, not here. Use shovel, which brought up, not now. And use rope, which prompted the text, you've already used this. Most who played the game progressed a couple of screens into it before becoming fed up by having to constantly reboot and tossing the disc in disgust, writing off the experience as a shoddily programmed farce. However, there is one thing about the world of computers that remains true no matter the era. Some people who use them have way too much time on their hands. A young man by the name of Michael Nevins decided to see if there was more to Pale Luna than what met the eye. 5 hours and 33 screens worth of trial and error and unplugged computer cords later, he finally managed to make the game display different text. The text in this new area read, "Pale Luna smiles wide. There are no paths. Pale Luna smiles wide. The ground is soft. Pale Luna smiles wide. Here. Command?" It was another hour still before Nevins stumbled upon the proper combination of phrases to make the game progress any further. Dig hole, drop gold, then fill hole. This caused the screen to display, "Congratulations. Dash dash 40.24248 dash 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 121.4434 dash dash." After which the game ceased to accept commands, requiring the user to reboot one last time. After some deliberation, Nevins came to the conclusion that the numbers referred to lines of latitude and longitude. The coordinates led to a point in the sprawling forest that dominated the nearby Lassen Volcanic Park. As he possessed much more free time than sense, Nevins vowed to see Pale Luna through to its ending. The next day, armed with a map, a compass, and a shovel, he navigated the park's trails, noting with amusement how each turn he made corresponded roughly to those that he took in-game. Though he initially regretted bringing the cumbersome digging tool on a mere hunch, the path's similarity all but confirmed his suspicions that the journey would end with him face-to-face with an eccentric's buried treasure. Out of breath after a tricky struggle to the coordinates, he was pleasantly surprised by a literal stumble upon a patch of uneven dirt. Shoveling as excitedly as he was, it would be an understatement to say that he was taken aback when his heavy strokes unearthed the badly decomposing head of a blonde-haired little girl. Nevins promptly reported the situation to the authorities. The girl was identified as Karen Paulson, 11, reported as missing to the San Diego Police Department a year and a half prior. Efforts were made to track down the programmer of Pale Luna, but the nearly anonymous legal gray area in which the software swapping community operated inescapably led to many dead ends. Collectors have been known to offer upwards of 6 figures for an authentic copy of the game. The rest of Karen's body was never found.
Spooky.
Congratulations. Pale Luna congratulates you.
Smiles widely, she does.
See, what's interesting to me about that is there are a lot of video game-based creepypastas, but most of them are about haunted games, or and then the game started glitching and Cthulhu yanked me into the TV, stuff like that. But, there are very few video game-based creepypastas that detail a situation that could actually happen.
In about 10, 15 years, you're going to have creepypastas like, I was watching this Twitch stream. You remember Twitch, right? And then I saw something. It was impossible. The URL was scrambled, and, anyway.
And then the skeleton jumped
And
out.
then skeleton, yeah.
Man, what's up with those skeletons? Jeez.
The webcam was me, but it was me in the future, and I was dead. Okay, go on.
Alright. Back to me again.
Back to GC.
Okay. This one is 12 minutes. Okay. Alright. All set then. So, submission for improvement, the Midnight Society. I give to you A Peculiar Kind of Madness. Written by Matt Dymerski. I'd always known that my great-grandma was an orphan, but in late October of last year, she decided to tell me the truth about what happened to her family. We were visiting her for her birthday, and it was a tradition in our household. A road trip we knew in the back of our minds we'd take only a few more times. She was turned 98, so that was just the cold, hard truth of the matter. In my childhood, the journey to central Iowa had been a fun and light-hearted affair. But now my brother and parents could only maintain strained politeness as we met up to hit the road together. Oh, one second. Excuse me. Ah. Each of us knew that this trip might be our last. For several hours, we drove through vast open farm fields that stretched from horizon to horizon. My great-grandma's house was down a narrow dirt road off a gravel tractor line. As a city boy, it was more or less the most remote possible dwelling I could imagine. She was born there, had lived her entire life there, and would soon, And as we parked in an open muddy rectangle and stepped out to stretch our legs, the constancy of the place surrounded me. Every single year of my life, this house and its land has been exactly the same. The sky was open blue, the earth was a sea of waving gold, and the wind was a smooth river of cool warmth. There was never anything to mar those pillars of century experience except for the house, the barn, a defunct old tractor, and the bell. The bell was a simple thing raised high on an old metal crook. It sat out in the fields about a quarter mile from the house, serving as a measure of the wind. If a storm was coming, the bell was supposed to ring, and a necessary precaution in tornado country. The only problem was, the bell and its crook had rusted over long ago. Every time I got out of the family van from age 5 to age 26, I glanced that direction and felt a sense of unease as my gaze fell upon that decayed artifact. This time, at age 27, I looked over and saw that the bell had been scrapped and polished clean of its rust. It glinted in the sunlight, practically daring me to look at it. I followed my family inside while struggling with a feeling of dread that I couldn't articulate. Who had cleaned the bell? And why? I tried to stop thinking about it as I was gathered in the kitchen and said our hellos. My great-grandmother was making tea and shooed off our attempts to help. She was a frail woman from whom movement was difficult, but she never let that stop her. The Wi-Fi password was on a note in the living room, she told us, with an unquestionable authority. Go stare at your phone and the tea will be ready in a moment. My brother and I did as well as we were told, but my parents turned on the television instead of looking at the phones. For a few minutes, we stayed in our separate worlds, only returning to the present when my great-grandma brought in the tea. And we had a nice time. That night, when everyone was long asleep, I happened to open my eyes and see a glow under the door of the guest room I shared with my brother. My parents were in a different room, would not see the same light, so it was up to me to investigate. Quietly, so as not to wake them, I crept out and down, finding my great-grandma still awake. She sat in her big jade leather chair, her gaze on the television. She asked me without looking my way, "You don't fall for this stuff, do you?" "What, like ads?" She pointed her little thin arm to the nearby couch. "Sit." I sat. "I'm going to tell you a family secret," she said softly. Finally, looking in my direction, "It's for you, possibly for your brother, but not your parents. Do you understand?" I didn't, not fully, but I nodded. "You know, I was an orphan for a time, born in this house, lived with my family, but then raised by an uncle after it happened." She didn't wait for my nod. "I was 10 years old that night. It was my birthday. My mother had gotten me a small cake about the size of your fist. I looked forward to that cake every year, since we didn't exactly have sweets bounding about back then. It was 11 cents, so rather expensive, but my mother got me for every one of us on her birthday, no matter what she had to scrimp or save. All year long, I saw Mary get her cake in January, Arthur gets the cake in March, Eleanor in June, Clarence in July, then Ruth a week after Clarence. Then it was months and months until me, the odd one out, on October 29th. I was so excited for that cake. As the days rolled closer, as the morning dawned, as the hours inched by, I hopped around the house like a bunny rabbit. But I wasn't allowed to eat it until well after supper. I stared at the clock, so I know. Yes, that one on the mantel there, the brass and chrome one. Same one. I stared at the clock, So I know. Night fell at 6:41. That was the moment bright orange stopped glinting off that clock and my mother rose to light the lamp. I looked at her down. Now? She smiled and shook her head. My brothers and sisters complained at chores and supported me, but she just shook her head at them. Too soon she'll ruin her supper. Father came in from the fields not long after that, dirty and tired as I'll get out. He ate in silence while we chatted endlessly about what type of cake it would be. Under the frostings, who knew? It might be raspberry, vanilla, or even chocolate. We grew silent as our father neared the cleaning of his plate, an event which would mark the end of supper. 4 pieces of meat and bread remained, then 3, then 2. Any moment now. He stopped at the last piece, holding unmoved about the remaining double gravy. We turned our head. It was the bell. The bell was ringing out in the fields. Father grunted, then pulled the last piece of his food back on his plate before rising. He opened the front door. We braced ourselves for the wind, but none came. He spat on and held up a finger to the night air, then shook his head. We moved back into our lamp lit and sat. Arthur asked, "Is it going to storm?" Mary asked, "Is there going to be a tornado?" My mother shook her head, smiled at us, and told us not to worry. No wind meant no storm. But that bell kept ringing. My father dipped his last piece of food in the gravy and prepared to eat it despite the constantly ringing bell, but then sighed and put it back down. He motioned to Clarence. Clarence was the oldest, so he understood. He was nearly a man himself, and trying the bell would be no problem. He grabbed a candle, protected the flame with his hand, and headed out to open the front door. My brothers and sisters and I piled up to the window, opening it. We found nothing but absolute still, chilly air. We watched this little spot of light move out around the house and into the fields, into the direction of the bell. The clanging metallic sound stopped, finally, and the candle's little flame hovered next to it for a solid minute. "Why is he taking so long to tie it?" Ruth asked. Eleanor suggested, "Maybe he's having trouble in making a knot. Knots are tough." We watched for another minute or two before, and I know how this sounds, the little flame in the distance began to rise. Slowly, smoothly, straight up. We followed it with our eyes, exclaiming the entire time as it moved out of sight beyond the roof overhang. The bell began ringing again. "His knot must have come loose," Arthur said. Our parents came to look at us, but there was nothing to see by then. Father motioned to Arthur. Happy to help out, Arthur grabbed a full lamp rather than a candle. He hurried out to the front door, around the house, and into the fields where we watched from the window. The lamp was easier to see, and we were absolutely certain he reached the crook. As the lamplight hovered there, the bell stopped ringing. At that point, we had no reason to think anything was amiss. Maybe the wind had just blown a wisp of burning candle string up into the sky, and Clarence had gotten lost in the dark. He would see the lamplight, find Arthur, and they would both come back. The rising little flame we'd seen had just been a fluke. Our problem was, staring out into the autumn night, we still felt no wind at all. We stared at the unmoving light for a strangely long period of time, and what was he doing out there? Was he calling for his brother? Why couldn't we hear him? Our parents looked away for a moment, and in that instant, the lamp went out. We children bleated, but by the time we glanced back, there was nothing to see. It was only darkness. The bell began ringing again. My father began grumbling, but there was no more suns to send outside. He narrowed his eyes with thought, and then handed Ruth, the oldest girl among us, our main lamp. My mother laughed. "Ruth, be a dear and go find your silly brothers." Ruth was a little hesitant, but she accepted the lamp. Leaving us in the darkness without it, she headed out around the house and into the fields. This lamp was brighter, and we could actually see her carrying hand and her white pajamas as a small lit halo. On the way there, she regularly called out, "Clarence, Arthur, you two lost?" About halfway there to where the other two lights had stopped, her calls went instantly silent mid-sentence. "Clarence, Arthur!" It wasn't that she gave up yelling. The sound reached up, had simply stopped completely. Still see her carrying the lamp, still see her hand in pajamas, still see her turning this way and that. She raised the house lamp near her face, and we saw her shouting in the darkness. Just didn't hear anything. Nothing except that constantly clanging bell, growing faster in pace and louder in urgency. Mary, Eleanor, and I looked up at our parents with fearful gazes. My father shook his head. His speak for the first time that night. So there's wind out there after all. The air is like a river inside an ocean. It's moving fast out there, carrying her voice away. I can't feel it here. My mother seemed worried, but she nodded and accepted it. We saw her accepting it, so we gulped and believed it too. We all glued our eyes to that open window. Roof reached a bell, and in that stronger light it entered our view, unmoving at the exact same time we heard it stop ringing. Roof looked this way and that, clearly concerned. She seemed to sound a yell a time or two before moving closer to the motionless bell. A half-tied rope hung from the crook, an indication that someone had attempted to tie it, but we couldn't see Clarence or Arthur anywhere near her. She put the lamp down and on the ground to free her hand from tying the rope, and the rest of the way, but that mostly had the light among the low-lying, recently harvested stalks. We waited. Our breaths held. The air held in my lungs started to burn. At long last, we were forced to breathe again. Roof's light continued to sit there, barely visible between the broken plants. "What's taking so long?" Mary asked. Eleanor said, "I hope she's all right." Father told us, "She's fine. Damn kids are just playing a game with us." My mother nodded in agreement. "Eleanor, go fetch your sister, will you?" Eleanor shook her head. "No way! It's scary out there." "It's just a game. You're not going to play a game with us, too, are you?" "Oh," Eleanor gulped. "Then go get your sister and brothers. Tell them to come back in." It was pitch black out there, and I was the same side with us, save for one lone candle. Trembling, Eleanor took out the last candle and crept out into the night, scooting along the side of the house to stay as close as possible. Shakily, she called, "Roof! Arthur! Clarence! This isn't funny anymore!" Now it was we who sat in the dark. As Eleanor began to move further away with the last of her light, we tensed. Father eyed the open front door. Mother softly moved to close the latch and latch it. I wondered what they meant by that move, because how were the others supposed to get back in? But I suppose they were unlatched if anyone came back and knocked. Mother moved away from us in search for more candles. Through it all, the bell kept ringing out of the dark. Increasingly scared, I heard Mary's hand tighten and yell out the window, "Be careful, Ellie!" She must have happened to cross that invisible sound threshold at that moment, because she turned around, surprised, and stepped closer. "I heard your voice go quiet, but there's no wind. Papa's wrong." She stepped away again. "See, when I passed this point, She held up the candle to show us that her mouth was still moving. But we heard nothing, and come to think of it, her hair wasn't moving, and we hadn't seen Roof's pajamas building any wind. I asked Father, Who's doing that? What's making it quiet out there?" "It's just a game," Father insisted. "They're all lying. She's just pretending to make noise so it looks like she's been silenced." Eleanor reached the bell, and Father's grip on my shoulder squeezed to near painful. She reached down for the lamp, and the roof had lifted it up with one hand and holding the candle with the other, and she approached the clanging bell. "See!" Mary whispered to Father. "Anna's not going out, even though she's not protecting the flame. There's no wind out there." "But the bell's ringing," he said gruffly. "So there is wind." Eleanor kept looking left and right as if she heard something. Slowly, she reached the bell, which was hanging unmoving for the crook. We could still hear it ringing. Next to me, Mary began to cry. "It's a game," Father said angrily. "It's just a game they're playing." Eleanor threw the lamp at something in the darkness, and we saw the lamp crash, shatter, and go dark, but heard nothing. She raced towards us, candle held, but the flame went out because of her haste. We waited to hear her approaching or screaming, but nothing followed. The bell continued to clang. We waited in terrified silence. Mother returned with a candle for each of us, and we sat vigil at the window. Nothing and no one moved. For hours the bell clanged without wind. The night remained pitch black. The bell clanged and clanged, driving deep into our ears with each passing minute. Near midnight we broke. Father was beyond agitated at this point. "Mary, go find your brothers and sisters." "No," she cried. "We're not going out there." Mother blared, "You have to. The game has to stop." Urged on by both of them, Mary burst into tears and climbed out the window. Holding her small candle, she clinched onto the field. Her sobs were quiet, and she passed the same point out in the darkness. Her flame reached the bell, and the ring stopped. The flame snuffed out. We held our breath. The bell began to ring again. Father clenched his fists. "Go." I turned and saw he was looking at us. I suddenly realized I was the only child left in the house. felt horribly alone. Everyone in me shrieked against the thought of going out into that cursed night. No. My mother wavered in place. No longer had I mainly in line with my father, she began to cry too. What are you doing? He demanded. It's just a game. There's nothing to be scared of. She screamed and demanded, why do you keep saying that? Why have I been helping you do this? He grabbed him, shouting in his face, because we haven't been saving our children their deaths. That's not what's happening. Pushed his hand away from him and ran for the window, and pushing past me, she tumbled out and screamed towards the still clanging bell, not out of fear of father, but out of terror of her children. Arthur, Clarence, Ruth, Eleanor, Mary, for God's sakes, where are you? He growled and leapt out at her, yelling, we didn't kill them, everything is fine. They both continued shouting until they passed past the point of darkness, and all went silent, except for the bell. Twice more it stopped ringing, and twice more it began again. In panic and terror, beyond reason, I closed and latched the window and pushed all the furniture against every entry in the house, and I curled in a cupboard, holding the last candle up to my face as it slowly melted its way down towards my fingers. I was alone. Somehow, I was alone. We all seen the danger and stared right as it happened, but one by one, they're all gone out there anyway. I'd been surrounded by a full band of Silmans my entire life, and now I was completely and utterly alone in a house in the middle of nowhere. And by the length of my candle, it was 3 in the morning when the knock came at the door. I trembled, but did not make a sound. The knock sounded again 40 heartbeats later. It was louder this time. I shook, holding my candle tight. The third knock was more like a tremendous crash or kick, and I heard the door explode inward. 60 heartbeats of silence passed, and then the floorboards creaked. Something in me told me to put out my candle for fear of it being seen through the cracks of the cupboard, but I didn't dare. Not darkness. I couldn't handle darkness. I would scream if I did, so I kept it lit. Slow, quiet steps moved towards the house. Whoever it was seemed to be pausing, listening at times, and others. It would rush forward to a random spot in a sudden frenzy and then stop abruptly. 400 beats after that, the bell began ringing again. But this time, it rang from inside the house. It rang from the kitchen. It rang from near the bed. It rang outside my cupboard. Clang 10 feet away, clang 5 feet away, clang right up against the cupboard door. And then it opened. I sat expectantly, mouth open, eyes wide, as I waited for my great-grandmother to continue. After a bit, I realized that was it. But what did you see? She shook her head. That's not the point. I'm here, so obviously I survived. A young man like you doesn't need to know what horrors walk this world outside the paved cities of man. Gulping, I asked, you're not just pulling my leg? This really happened? Yes! Her gaze was distanced by a television light. But here's what I want to tell you, and what you should tell your brother. The thing that opened that cupboard door and stared at me from the dark, the thing that hoped to wait out my candle before the coming of dawn, had a bell tied to one of its teeth with a blood-soaked rag, such that it would clang when its mouth was open for hunting. Somehow, some way, some heroic poor soul managed to tie a warning bell to that thing before they died. We heard that warning bell all night long, and yet my entire family walked out there one by one. We didn't listen because we didn't want to listen. My father knew what he was doing halfway through, but he didn't want to accept what we'd already done, so he did even worse to continue living the lie. I narrowed my eyes. What are you saying? She grabbed my hand briefly. Fear will tell you to put your candle out, but your head will tell you to keep it lit. Don't give in to fear. You keep it lit, you'll get through this. Turning my head, I became aware of the sound in the distance. Is that the bell? I was so caught up I didn't even notice. How long has it been ringing? She just clenched her fist and turned away back to the television.
The bell was coming from inside the house!
Okay, Stoker.
Are you saying it was Granny Stoker?
Yeah.
What? It was Granny Stoker.
It was Granny. Oh, Granny Stoker!
Alright. So this next one is very special to me. You won't find it anywhere online. because I wrote it. I mean, I didn't write it, but it was told to me. So
You
So-
transcribed it.
yeah, well, 34 years after the fact, yes, I transcribed it. Let me send the link to Frederick. Hang on. Okay. All right, so submitted for the approval of the Midnight Society. This is called the Third Plateau. In the 80s, for several summers, I attended a summer camp up in the mountains of Northern California. Our camp experience had all the usual stuff you'd expect, including scary stories told around a campfire. There was one particular counselor from '87 who told us a story that stuck with me. It went like this. In 1927, the original people who had found the camp were personally surveying the 5 plateaus on the land which they'd purchased. This isn't accurate. The dates were wrong, the camp's property wasn't nearly that vast, and there were coastal mountains rather than plateaus, but that's still how it was told, and because we were kids and because it was a spooky campfire story, we didn't bother to question the details. When surveying the third of the 5 plateaus, they encountered a cave with a thin, disheveled, bearded man in rags who flew at them in a fury. He claimed ownership of the entire area and nearly assaulted them before they were able to calm them down. Apparently the man did have some legitimate claim to the land, it was determined, but the sale had been made without consulting him, as he'd not been heard from in years, and it was assumed he'd met some nasty end in the wilderness. The camp founders explained their intentions and managed to negotiate a deal with the man. They would build the camp and make sure the staff knew to avoid the third plateau, and in exchange the man would leave them and the campers alone. The man agreed, they shook on the deal, and the camp was built. Years passed without incident. Then in 1947, 20 years to the day after the original encounter with the man who owned the land where the camp now stood, a reckless young junior counselor disobeyed the long-honored but unexplained prohibition on visiting the third plateau. He didn't know the significance of the rule and recklessly led his troop of young campers to the area, even setting up tents right near the cave. This is also inaccurate, or at least it was by the 80s. At that camp we only did day trips, not overnight ones. In the middle of the night, the man in the cave, who was now an old man, haggard and gray, starved, emaciated, a walking nightmare, with eyes sunken in deep pits, terrorized the trespassers. He attacked them with a swiftness you wouldn't expect from an old man, and the panicked counselor was barely able to save all of his terrified kids. The old man retreated into the cave, but the kids were utterly traumatized, sobbing. The camp tried to smooth things over and cover up the incident, and they managed to keep it from hitting the press, but the damage was done. The camp section ended early, and the junior counselor was severely punished. With the camp closed for the summer, the staff were sent home. But before he left, the junior counselor decided he had some unfinished business to wrap up. He took a pair of gardening gloves and a shovel from the camp tool shed, then headed to the third plateau, right to the old man's cave. He noticed that there were bones strewn here and there in the cave in small piles. There were small ones that were probably from rodents, and larger ones that might have been deer or something else. The junior counselor found himself wondering how many people had gone missing over the years in that area. From out of nowhere, the old man came at him, raging like a demon. The junior counselor tried to hit him with the shovel, but the outstretched hands of the old man moved with unnatural speed. The gnarled fingers wrapped themselves around the junior counselor's throat and held it with the strength of a young man. There was nothing but vengeful insanity in the old man's bloodshot eyes. He bared his long, crooked yellow teeth in a crazed smile, cackling, a thin line of slimy drool dribbling from his mouth onto the counselor's face. The old man's fingers tightened, and the junior counselor felt his consciousness start to waver. But then the junior counselor thought of his kids, of the humiliation he'd suffered for his failure, and he got angry. He wrapped his own hands around the old man's throat in retaliation, and squeezed as hard as he could. With a sputtering, hoarse voice, the old man began to gasp over and over again. Why? 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 The junior counselor squeezed with all his strength, and it almost seemed like a gruesome stalemate, until finally the old man's horrible grasp began to weaken. Just once more, the old man croaked out, "Why?" And then he was still. The junior counselor carried the body, which was so emaciated that it hardly weighed anything, just a fleshy bag of bones, to a ravine near the cave where the soil was soft and deep. He dug as deep a hole as he could before his arms started to ache, and then checked the old man's body unceremoniously into it. He hurriedly filled up the hole again, not wanting to arouse suspicion by being gone too long. There was a visible mound in the spot where it was done, but it was the best he could do. He hurried back to the camp and never told a soul. 20 more years went by. In 1967, the former junior counselor had become a senior counselor, and one of the respected staffers who ran the camp. By that time, 2 counselors were assigned to every group of kids, 1 senior and 1 junior. It was the last summer the now senior counselor would be spending there before moving on, and against the long-standing regulation, he once again took his new troop of campers to the Third Plateau. They set up camp that evening, and while the junior counselor played the guitar and sang campfire songs with the kids, the senior counselor got up and left the safety of the fire circle. He went down to the ravine, to the spot he hadn't seen in 20 years. He didn't really know why he was revisiting the spot, or maybe he just didn't want to admit it to himself. By the light of the full moon, he noticed something. The spot was long overgrown, but the mound that had been left after he'd buried the old man was gone. Instead, there was an irregular depression, concave and lumpy, as though long ago something had forcibly clawed its way out of the mound. It was then that he noticed the ravine was absolutely silent. When did the crickets stop chirping? They'd definitely been chirping before. He hastened out of the ravine, his heart thumping hard in his chest. He meant to go straight away back to the fire circle, but somehow the senior counselor lost his way. Instead of the fire circle, he found himself staring at the old man's cave. He wasn't even sure how he'd managed to get there. The blackness inside seemed deeper and darker than any shadow he'd ever seen, and there was no sound but his own panicked breathing. He couldn't take his eyes off the darkness, even though there was nothing discernible in it, not a trace of movement. He wanted to run, but something prevented him. Without knowing what he was doing, the senior counselor took 1 step forward, then another. He could almost begin to make out a shape crouching there, deep in the cave. Back at the fire circle, the junior counselor's fireside songs were abruptly interrupted by a high scream off in the distance. It was definitely the voice of the senior counselor, but it wasn't the kind of sound you'd want to hear anyone make. It was the sound of a human being experiencing sudden, unimaginable agony, both physical and mental. There wasn't just pain in that scream, but a kind of despair as well. The sound of a man who, in his last moments, was completely taken by madness. It lasted for a full second and then was cut off. The sound was so horrible that the junior counselor didn't even think to try and save his superior. Indeed, none of them had any thoughts at that moment other than getting the hell out of there and back to safety. The junior counselor and the kids sprinted on the trails back to the main camp, never even looking back. The police and forest rangers descended on the next day, combing the entire region thoroughly. They scoured the land, trying to find any trace of the senior counselor. No body was ever recovered. His footprints led into the old man's cave and then simply stopped. The only thing they ever found was one word written in dried, sticky blood on the cave wall. Why? The counselor finished the story by mentioning, of course, that now was 1987, 20 years to the day since that incident. And, of course, right as our counselor was finishing the story, the younger counselor in training, who had quietly slipped off during the tale, lunged at us from behind and bellowed, "Why? Why?" causing us kids to shout in fear, and then quickly laughed off. It was one of my favorite summer camp memories. And that is the story of the Third Plateau.
Why?
Yeah.
You know it's going to be a Jonas story when it begins with the words, back in the 80s.
Yeah, you think. Yeah.
Wait, all Jonas stories start back in the 80s?
All of them.
Pretty much. But, yeah, that actually, I mean, I obviously I dressed it up a bit to make it a creepypasta, but basically that's the story. So, there you go.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
10 out of 10. All right, Miller, what have you got for us?
I got a story from Reddit called "I Found an Open Wi-Fi Connection."
Oh, that is a horror story.
I submit for the approval of the Midnight Society. I found an open Wi-Fi connection by Rumcake. They didn't believe me when I told them there was an open wireless network in range, aptly named Free Wi-Fi. was rather slow, but that's not the problem. You see, we were camping out in the middle of nowhere. Tar Hollow forests for any fellow Ohioans out there. We parked the truck about a mile down the trail, and from there was a 15-minute drive to the only ramp onto the highway. We were far removed from civilization, to say the least. After we were all done with checking in on Facebook and replying to Snapchats, my friends and I made a game of finding the source of the signal. Marco and Sean went in one direction, Mike and I the other. 3 minutes later, we were all back at the site. The signal dropped off after 185 paces in the direction I went, and roughly 250 in the opposite. We agreed with Sean's proposal to go in a third direction, so to approximate by triangulation the whereabouts of the source. Marco counted the steps, Mike kept an eye on the signal indicator, Sean and I looked out for anything that remotely resembled a router. About 100 feet in, Mike told Marco to stop counting. The signal was at full strength. I looked around for flashing LEDs or running cables or anything that lit up. Marco suggested it could be a pocket Wi-Fi hotspot that another camper had left behind. Though that was unlikely as there was no 3G coverage out there. But we found nothing. We gave up the search and made our way back to the campsite. That's when the Wi-Fi signal disappeared. The sun was setting and it was starting to fog up. A little spooked, we all agreed we could pack our stuff and hike back to the truck. When we got back, we realized that we had been robbed. Our bags were torn open, our food supplies were missing, and our tents were toppled. What immediately seemed odd to me was that the thieves hadn't taken our laptops or cameras. Upon closer inspection, all they took were the food and beverages. And in my opinion, that was the scary part. Needless to say, we crammed whatever we could into our torn up bags and made a dash for the truck. That wasn't until we got back onto the truck and Mike told us to check our phones. The Wi-Fi signal was at full strength again. A chill ran down my spine when I saw the name of the connection. Run, boys, run!
The Wi-Fi was also coming from inside the house. Really, so much stuff is coming from inside that house, I'd move.
Yeah.
My Wi-Fi
House is
afternoon.
coming from inside the house.
Did you say the house is coming from inside the house?
Yes.
Murderous Wi-Fi. Now that's a new one. Ah!
You know, I like that, though. I like that. That's,
That's it.
a nice
I'm
little
reading some short-
modernization.
Sorry, Ty says that's it. Yes, I'm reading some short ones tonight because I'm having some problems with allergies, so I don't want to talk very long.
Okay.
That's valid. Valergies. Alright, Richolas, what do you have for us?
Okay. I have submitted for the approval of the Midnight Society. Stories for My Daughter. Written by hrhdaf, or hrhdaf, I guess.
Oh, I've heard of him! Alright, I'm muting myself now.
Okay. I know they say Christmas is the most wonderful time of the year, but for me it's Halloween. I deck the hall with cobwebs and fake spiders. It's just such a special time. Autumn is here and the leaves are beginning to fall. It's time for dressing up and suspending reality. We sit in our cozy homes with our jack-o'-lanterns and candy, scaring ourselves and almost will ourselves to see something otherworldly. My daughter has always loved scary Halloween stories, and last year was no different. We were at the kitchen table, hollowing out our pumpkins and drawing scary faces on them ready to carve. As we scooped the stringy seeds into a large bowl on the table, she asked, "Is it time yet? Time for stories?" Okay, I smiled at her. Where should we start? How about the monkey's paw? No, that's an old one, she grimaced. Tell me something new. Okay. And I glanced out the window and saw the moon disappearing behind a cloud. Right, I've got one for you. And as we scooped and carved this this is the story I told her. No comma there, come on. Once upon a time, long ago, there was a boy named Jacob, and he lived with his father in a house on the outskirts of the forest. One night, his father roused him from a deep sleep. "My son," he whispered, "I have to go out. One of the women in the village is about to give birth, and I must be there." Jacob's father was a village doctor and much respected. "But father," Jacob mumbled sleepily, "what about the wolf?" There had been sightings of a large wolf around the edges of the village, and the forest and the forest, and the villagers were living in fear. "Don't be afraid, son," the father reassured him. "I'll lock all the doors and windows, and you'll be perfectly safe." The boy's chin trembled, but he trusted his father and agreed to try and go back to sleep. Once his father had gone out, Jacob couldn't sleep. Every noise and creak in the house seemed amplified. He took his blankets from the bed and curled up in front of the window, waiting for his father to return. He saw the full moon through the window and was comforted by the light. Smells of the night forest wafted through his window, and he dozed fitfully. Eventually, he saw the lights from his father's car coming back up to the house. He was so relieved that he ran to meet him. Jacob's father saw a huge wolf bound out of the house towards his car, but before he could do anything, he heard the sound of a shotgun, and the wolf fell to the ground. From the edge of the forest, a group of villagers appeared. They had formed a posse and had been out hunting the wolf. At first, they didn't understand the doctor's anguished cry. "What have you done?" he yelled, and he ran to the spot where the wolf had dropped, grabbing its body and cradling it in his arms. As he took its last breath, the villagers were horrified to see the wolf's massive furry body transformed back into that of a child. "So the doctor's son was a wolf?" my daughter asked, her brown eyes wide. "That's a sad story, Mommy." "I guess it is, sweetheart, but sometimes horror is as sad as well as scary. Anyway, I think these are ready to be lit." Our pumpkins were finished, and we carved them into the living room. And we carried them into the living room. We put them on the low table in front of the TV and lit candles in them. Tradition dictated now it was time for spooky cartoons. She'd seen them many times before and quickly got bored. She picked up a dusty pack of tarot cards from the table. "Tell me my future, Mommy." I sighed. "I don't like to use those anymore, honey. How about I tell you another story?" "Is it about tarot cards?" she asked. "No, although the magician in it did use cards to do some of his magic tricks. This story is called Smoke and Mirrors." She curled into me on the sofa, and I began. Once upon a time, there was a man, and he made his living doing magic tricks. He did children's parties and very small venues. He wasn't very good, and most of the time people could tell when he switched cards or pulled things from up his sleeves. Then one day he was browsing the local newspaper when he saw an advertisement. "Free to good home, pair of magic cabinets, amaze your audience." Well, he was very keen. He didn't earn much money, and that was the kind of thing that he would love to use in his act but could never afford. He quickly rang the number on the advert and arranged to go pick them up. When he saw that they were more than he could have ever hoped. They were roughly 6 feet tall and hexagonally shaped. Each outside wall was covered in full-length mirrors. The doors on the front swung open noiselessly, and the interior was lined in plush black velvet. The magician couldn't believe his luck, and asked why the man was just giving them away. The seller just replied that he had no use for them anymore. "So how do they work?" asked the magician. The seller disappeared back into his house for a moment and came back carrying a large cage with a parrot in it. "I don't know how this works," he admitted. "It just does." He put the parrot into one of the cabinets. He walked to the second cabinet and knocked on the door 3 times. "Welcome back," he boomed in a theatrical tone. A hissing sound came from the first cabinet, and smoke could be seen coiling from the cracks around the door. He opened the door of the second cabinet, and there was his parrot in its cage. "Oh, these are marvelous," squealed the magician excitedly. He loaded them into his dilapidated old van. "Just one word of caution," said the seller. "When I procured them, I was told under no circumstances to use a human being when doing this trick. I suggest you invest in a parrot yourself." The magician nodded his head eagerly and went on his way. After this, things quickly picked up for the magician. While the rest of his act was still mediocre at best, people were very impressed with his magic cabinet act. He would leave the cabinets where people could examine them during his performance and do his transportation trick last. For most of his act, the audience would be barely watching, poking and prodding at the cabinets trying to figure out how to work their secret. The magician was very proud of his new act, but something was bothering him. He currently used either a rabbit or a goldfish in a bowl for his cabinet trick, and he felt there was something a little dull about that. One day, as he was reaching the finale of the show, he realized that his rabbit had escaped. He tried to explain, but the audience began to jeer him. Someone from the crowd began to shout that they would quite happily get into the cabinet. In desperation, he agreed. A tall, muscular man made his way through the audience and got into the first cabinet. The magician was very nervous. He knocked on the door of the second cabinet and loudly announced, "Welcome back!" Clouds of hissing smoke rolled from the first cabinet, and the door of the second cabinet swung open. The tall, muscular man stepped out. He looked a little dazed, but none the worse for his experience. The audience clapped, and that was the show over. The next few months, the magician carried on with his show, sometimes 2 performances a day, only now he used audience members for the transportation trick. He thought it looked more impressive, and the audience loved it. One evening, after a busy day, he was sitting relaxing watching TV when he saw something that made his blood run cold. There was a story on the news about a man who had gone crazy and killed his family with a kitchen knife. The magician recognized the man instantly, the tall, muscular man who had been the first to go into his cabinet. He couldn't eat or sleep, and nagging fears ran through his mind. In the end, he determined to go visit the killer in prison. He faced the killer through the thick glass pane. He picked up the phone on the wall next to him and gestured for the prisoner to do the same. "You may not remember me," he began. "Oh, I know who you are, Magic Man," the killer interrupted. "And I'm glad you've come. I wanted to thank you." "Thank me?" stammered the magician. "For what?" "Why, for welcoming me back into the world," smiled the killer. "I don't understand. It's so much cooler here," the killer smirked. "So much cooler, and so many opportunities." "I don't understand," repeated the magician. "Why did you kill your family? What happened in the box?" The killer began to laugh, and it was a sound that chilled the magician to the bone. "So it was an accident?" He laughed harder. "You stupid little man, didn't you know? Your cabinets are portals. We've been watching and waiting for so long. We can't fit into parrots or fish or rabbits, but give us a human body. A demon can fit nicely into a human body. How many people have passed through your cabinets, Magic Man?" And with that, he dropped the phone and got up and walked back into the prison. The magician sat numbly. In his estimation, it was well over 100. "Ooh," my daughter's eyes were like saucers. "So 100 demons on Earth?" "Oh, at least," I chuckled. I'm not sure the magician's math was very good. "Anyway, baby girl, it's getting very late now. It's time we tucked you up in bed." We headed upstairs and got her settled. She was very sleepy now. It had been a long night. "Tell me the Halloween story, Mommy?" she asked. "No, which story would that be?" I teased. "How about the one about the hitchhiker?" She shook her head. "The Halloween story, Mommy," she giggled. Okay, I smiled. "Are you sure you won't have bad dreams?" She shook her head more vehemently and grinned. I would never understand why my daughter loved this story so much, but I began. "Once upon a time there was a kindly queen, and she lived in a big castle in a kingdom far away from here. Her husband, the king, however, was mean, and cross almost all the time, and one day he threw her down the castle stairs. The queen was badly hurt, and after that she couldn't have any children. She had always loved children, and every Halloween she would invite all the children from the surrounding village to the castle, which would be decorated with hundreds of carved pumpkins and thousands of candles. She'd give them the finest treats, and the children always had a wonderful time. Eventually the king died, and the queen was left alone. Now, I know you probably think she'd be pleased that the evil king was dead, but all that happened was that she got more and more lonely. She realized what she had missed out on in her life and became sad and bitter. Her heart grew cold and black. She would look out from the castle tower and see the little children playing in the courtyard, and it no longer gave her joy. Their laughter grated on her like nails on a chalkboard, and an evil plot hatched in her mind. The next Halloween, she shooed the cooks and maids from the kitchen and prepared all the Halloween treats herself. There were the most scrumptious candies and cookies made with only the finest ingredients. There was only one ingredient she used that had no place in her recipes. She liberally mixed rat poison in with the sugar, and there was sugar in everything she made. Just like all the years before, the children came to her Halloween party, and like every other year, they stuffed themselves with all the goodies the queen had provided. As usual, they all had a wonderful time. At the end of the night, their parents came and took them home. That was a terrible night in the village. Some of the children were terribly sick, and a lot of them even died. I heard a tiny snuffle from my daughter and looked down to see her sleeping peacefully. I kissed her forehead and made my way quietly out of her room. She made it to the end of the story. She'd always say, "And that's why I'm not allowed to go trick-or-treating, isn't it, Mommy?" I thought back to the inspiration for my cautionary tale. That terrible Halloween night 6 years ago when some crazy woman had poisoned the children's candy. The sound of sirens filled the night air, and there were parents panicking and crying in the street. My neighbor came rushing out of his house, holding his limp son in his arms. The jack-o'-lantern on the step tumbling down in front of him and splattering into mush on the sidewalk while he made a noise of pain so terrible it barely sounded human. I stood on my porch and stared at it, unable to comprehend the horror unfolding in front of me. Some of the children were dead before an ambulance even arrived. The clock on the mantelpiece downstairs struck 12, pulling me back to reality, and I turned and looked back into my daughter's room. The witching hour had come and gone, and our special day was over. Her bed was empty.
Aw, that one is sad.
That one is sad and wholesome and very good. I like that one.
Man.
Oh,
Golly gee whiz. Golly gee willikers.
Golly
Gee willikers, that dang evil cooking lady. How dare she?
Yeah.
I'll tell you what. Alright. I guess it loops back around to me now?
Yeah, and then we find out the lady who made the poison candy also went to a magic act like a year before.
And she was phone. Okay, anyway. I'm doing another very well-known one that somehow we haven't done on here before. I had initially thought it would be a little bit too long to read, but when I look over it, I think this one won't actually take all that long. Maybe like, I don't know, 15, 20 minutes or so.
Okay.
So, this one, I'm sure some of you are familiar with. Submitted for the approval of the Midnight Society. This story is called NoEnd House. And it is credited to Brian Russell. And here is the link for those who wish it. And here begins our tale. Let me start by saying that Peter Terry was addicted to heroin. We were friends in college and continued to be after I graduated. Notice that I said I. He dropped out after 2 years of barely cutting it. After I moved out of the dorms and into a small apartment, I didn't see Peter as much. We would talk online every now and then. AIM was king in pre-Facebook years. There was a period where he wasn't online for about 5 weeks straight. I wasn't worried. He was a pretty notorious flake and drug addict, so I assumed he just stopped caring. Then one night, I saw him log on. Before I could initiate a conversation, he sent me a message. David, man, we need to talk. That was when he told me about the NoEnd House. It got that name because no one had ever reached the final exit. The rules were pretty simple and cliché. Reach the final room of the building and you win $500. There were 9 rooms in all. The house was located outside the city, roughly 4 miles from my house. Apparently, Peter had tried and failed. He was a heroin and who knows what the fuck addict, so I figured the drugs got the best of him and he wigged out at a paper ghost or something. He told me it would be too much for anyone, that it was unnatural. I didn't believe him. I told him I would check it out the next night, and no matter how hard he tried to convince me otherwise, $500 sounded too good to be true. I had to go. Following night. When I arrived, I immediately noticed something strange about the building. Have you ever seen or read something that shouldn't be scary, but for some reason a chill crawls up your spine? I walked toward the building and the feeling of uneasiness only intensified as I opened the front door. My heart slowed and I let out a relieved sigh as I entered. The room looked like a normal hotel lobby decorated for Halloween. A sign was posted in place of a worker. It read, "Room 1 this way. 8 more follow. Reach the end and you win." I chuckled and made my way to the first door. The first area was almost laughable. The decor resembled the Halloween aisle of a Kmart, complete with sheet ghosts and animatronic zombies that gave a static growl when you passed by. At the far end was an exit. It was the only door besides the one I entered through. I brushed through the fake spider webs and headed for the second room. I was greeted by fog as I opened the door to room 2. The room definitely upped the ante in terms of technology. Not only was there a fog machine, but a bat hung from the ceiling and flew in a circle. Scary. They seemed to have a Halloween soundtrack that one would find in a 99-cent store on loop somewhere in the room. I didn't see a stereo, but I guess they must have used a PA system. I stepped over a few toy rats that wheeled around and walked with a puffed chest across to the next area. I reached for the doorknob, and my heart sank to my knees. I did not want to open that door. A feeling of dread hit me so hard I could barely even think. Logic overtook me after a few terrified moments, and I shook it off and entered the next room. Room 3 is when things began to change. On the surface, it looked like a normal room. There was a chair in the middle of the wood-paneled floor. A single lamp in the corner did a poor job of lighting the area, casting a few shadows across the floor and walls. That was the problem. Shadows. Plural. With the exception of the chair's shadow, there were others. I had barely walked in the door, and I was already terrified. It was at that moment that I knew something wasn't right. I didn't even think as I automatically tried to open the door I came through. It was locked from the other side. That set me off. Was someone locking the doors as I progressed? There was no way. I would have heard them. Was it a mechanical lock that set automatically? Maybe. But I was too scared to really think. I turned back to the room, and the shadows were gone. The chair's shadow remained, but the others were gone. I slowly began to walk. I used to hallucinate when I was a kid, so I wrote off the shadows as a figment of my imagination. I began to feel better as I made it to the halfway point of the room. I looked down as I took my steps, and that's when I saw it. Or didn't see it. My shadow wasn't there. I didn't have time to scream. I ran as fast as I could to the other door and flung myself without thinking into the room beyond. The fourth room was possibly the most disturbing. As I closed the door, all light seemed to be sucked out and put back into the previous room. I stood there, surrounded by darkness, not able to move. I'm not afraid of the dark, and never have been, but I was absolutely terrified. All sight had left me. I held my hand in front of my face, and if I didn't know what I was doing, I would have never been able to tell. Darkness doesn't describe it. I also couldn't hear anything. It was dead silence. When you're in a soundproof room, you can still hear yourself breathing. You can hear yourself being alive. I couldn't. I began to stumble forward after a few moments, my rapidly beating heart the only thing I could feel. There was no door in sight. Wasn't even sure there was one this time. The silence was then broken by a low hum. I felt something behind me. I spun around wildly, but could barely even see my own nose. I knew it was there, though. Regardless of how dark it was, I knew something was there. The hum grew louder, closer. It seemed to surround me, but I knew whatever was causing the noise was there in front of me, inching closer. I took a step back. I had never felt that kind of fear. I can't really describe true fear. I wasn't even scared I was going to die. I was scared of whatever the alternative was. I was afraid of what this thing had in store for me. Then, lights flashed on for a second, and I saw nothing. I saw nothing, and I know I saw nothing there. The room was again plunged into darkness, and the hum became a wild screech. I screamed in protest. I couldn't hear this goddamn sound for another minute. I ran backwards, away from the noise, and fumbled for the door handle. I turned and fell into room 5. Before I describe room 5, you have to understand something. I am not a drug addict. I have had no history of drug abuse or any sort of psychosis short of the childhood hallucinations I mentioned earlier, and those were only when I was really tired or just waking up. I entered the NoEnd house with a clear head. After falling in from the previous room, my view of room 5 was from my back, looking up at the ceiling. What I saw didn't scare me, it simply surprised me. Trees had grown into the room and towered above my head. The ceilings in this room were taller than the others, which made me think I was in the center of the house. I got up off the floor, dusted myself off, and took a look around. It was definitely the biggest room of them all. I couldn't even see the door from where I was. Various brush and trees must have blocked my line of sight with the exit. Up to this point, I figured the rooms were going to get scarier, but this was a paradise compared to the last room. I also assumed whatever was in room 4 stayed back there. I was incredibly wrong. As I made my way deeper into the room, I began to hear what one would hear if they were in a forest. Chirping bugs and the occasional flap of birds seemed to be my only company in this room. That was the thing that bothered me the most. I heard the bugs and other animals, but I didn't see any of them. I began to wonder how big this house was. From the outside, when I first walked up to it, it looked like a regular house. It was definitely on the bigger side, but this was almost a full forest in here. The canopy covered my view of the ceiling, but I assumed it was still there, however high it was. I couldn't see any walls either. The only way I knew I was still inside was that the floor matched the other rooms, the standard dark wood paneling. I kept walking, hoping that the next tree I passed would reveal the door. After a few moments of walking, I felt a mosquito fly onto my arm. I shook it off and kept going. A second later, I felt about 10 more land on my skin at different places. I felt them crawl up and down my arms and legs, and a few made their way across my face. I flailed wildly to get them all off, but they just kept crawling. I looked down and let out a muffled scream, more of a whimper, to be honest. I didn't see a single bug. Not one bug was on me, but I could feel them crawl. I heard them fly by my face and sting my skin, but I couldn't see a single one. I dropped to the ground and began to roll wildly. I was desperate. I hated bugs, especially ones I couldn't see or touch, but these bugs could touch me and they were everywhere. I began to crawl. I had no idea where I was going. The entrance was nowhere in sight, and I still hadn't even seen the exit. So I just crawled, my skin wriggling with the presence of those phantom bugs. After what seemed like hours, I found the door. I grabbed the nearest tree and propped myself up, mindlessly slapping my arms and legs to no avail. I tried to run, but I couldn't. My body was exhausted from crawling and dealing with whatever it was that was on me. I took a few shaky steps to the door, grabbing each tree on the way for support. It was only a few feet away when I heard it, the low hum from before. It was coming from the next room, and it was deeper. I could almost feel it inside my body, like when you stand next to an amp at a concert. The feelings of the bugs on me lessened as the hum grew louder. As I placed my hand on the doorknob, the bugs were completely gone, but I couldn't bring myself to turn the knob. I knew that if I let go, the bugs would return, and there was no way I could make it back to room 4. I just stood there, my head pressed against the door marked 6, and my hand shakily grasping the knob. The hum was so loud I couldn't even hear myself pretend to think. There was nothing I could do but move on. Room 6 was next, and room 6 was hell. I closed the door behind me, my eyes held shut and my ears ringing. The hum was surrounding me. As the door clicked into place, the hum was gone. I opened my eyes in surprise, and the door I had shut was also gone. It was just a wall now. I looked around in shock. The room was identical to room 3, the same chair and lamp, but with the correct amount of shadows this time. The only real difference was that there was no exit door, and the one I came in through was gone. As I said before, I had no previous issues in terms of mental instability, but in that moment I fell into what I now know was insanity. I didn't scream. I didn't make a sound. At first I scratched softly. The wall was tough, but I knew the door was there somehow. I just knew it was. I scratched at where the doorknob should be. I clawed at the wall frantically with both hands, my nails being filed down to the skin against the wood. I fell silently to my knees, the only sound in the room the incessant scratching against the wall. I knew it was there. The door was there. I knew it was just there. I knew if I could just get past this wall... "Are you all right?" I jumped off the ground and spun in one motion. I leaned against the wall behind me, and I saw what it was that spoke to me. To this day, I regret ever turning around. There was a little girl. She was wearing a soft white dress that went down to her ankles. She had long blonde hair to the middle of her back and white skin and blue eyes. She was the most frightening thing I had ever seen, and I know that nothing in my life will ever be as unnerving as what I saw in her. While looking at her, I saw something else. Where she stood, I saw what looked like a man's body, only larger than normal and covered in hair. He was naked from head to toe, but his head was not human, and his toes were hooves. It wasn't the devil, but at that moment it might as well have been. The form had the head of a ram and the snout of a wolf. It was horrifying, and it was synonymous with the little girl in front of me. They were the same form. I can't really describe it, but I saw them at the same time. They shared the same spot in that room, but it was like looking at two separate dimensions. When I saw the girl, I saw the form, and when I saw the form, I saw the girl. I couldn't speak. I could barely even see. My mind was revolting against what it was attempting to process. I had been scared before in my life, and I had never been scared more than when I was trapped in the 4th room, but that was before room 6. I just stood there, staring at whatever it was that spoke to me. There was no exit. I was trapped here with it. And then it spoke again. David, you should have listened. When it spoke, I heard the words of the little girl, but the other form spoke through my mind in a voice I won't attempt to describe. There was no other sound. The voice just kept repeating that sentence over and over in my mind, and I agreed. I didn't know what to do. I was slipping into madness, yet couldn't take my eyes off what was in front of me. I dropped to the floor. I thought I had passed out, but the room wouldn't let me. I just wanted it to end. I was on my side, my eyes wide open, and the form staring down at me. Scurrying across the floor in front of me was one of the battery-powered rats from the 2nd room. The house was toying with me. But for some reason, seeing that rat pulled my mind back from whatever depths it was headed, and I looked around the room. I was getting out of there. I was determined to get out of that house and live and never think about this place again. I knew this room was hell, and I wasn't ready to take up a residency. At first, it was just my eyes that moved. I searched the walls for any kind of opening. The room wasn't that big, so it didn't take long to soak up the entire layout. The demon still taunted me, the voice growing louder as the form stayed rooted where it stood. I placed my hand on the door, lifted myself up to all fours, and turned to scan the wall behind me. Then I saw something I couldn't believe. The form was now right at my back, whispering into my mind how I shouldn't have come. I felt its breath on the back of my neck, but I refused to turn around. A large rectangle was scratched into the wood before me, with a small dent chipped away in the center of it. Right in front of my eyes, I saw the large 7 I had mindlessly etched into the wall. I knew what it was. Room 7 was just beyond that wall where room 5 was moments ago. I don't know how I had done it, maybe it was just my state of mind at the time, but I had created the door. I knew I had. In my madness, I had scratched into the wall what I needed the most, an exit to the next room. Room 7 was close. I knew the demon was right behind me, but for some reason it couldn't touch me. I closed my eyes and placed both hands on the large 7 in front of me. I pushed. I pushed as hard as I could. The demon was now screaming in my ear. It told me I was never leaving. It told me that this was the end, but I wasn't going to die. I was going to live there in room 6 with it. I wasn't. I pushed and screamed at the top of my lungs. I knew I was going to push through the wall eventually. I clenched my eyes shut and screamed, and the demon was gone. I was left in silence. I turned around slowly and was greeted by the room as it was when I entered, just a chair and a lamp. I couldn't believe it, but I didn't have time to think about it. I turned back to the 7 and jumped back slightly. What I saw was a door. It wasn't the one I had scratched, but a regular door with a large 7 on it. My whole body was shaking. It took me a while to turn the knob. I just stood there, staring at the door. I couldn't stay in room 6. I couldn't. But if this was only room 6, I couldn't imagine what 7 had in store. I must have stood there for an hour, just staring at the 7. Finally, with a deep breath, I twisted the knob and opened the door to room 7. I stumbled through the door, mentally exhausted and physically weak. The door behind me closed and I realized where I was. I was outside. Not outside like room 5, but actually outside. My eyes stung. I wanted to cry. I fell to my knees and tried, but I couldn't. I was finally out of that hell. I didn't even care about the prize that was promised. I turned and saw that the door I just went through was the entrance. I walked to my car and drove home, thinking of how nice a shower sounded. As I pulled up to my house, I felt uneasy. The joy of leaving NoEnd house had faded, and dread was slowly building in my stomach. I shook it off as residual from the house and made my way to the front door. I entered and immediately went up to my room. There on my bed was my cat, Baskerville. He was the first living thing I had seen all night, and I reached to pet him. He hissed and swiped at my hand. I recoiled in shock, as he had never acted like that. But I thought, whatever, he's an old cat. I jumped in the shower and got ready for what I was expecting to be a sleepless night. After my shower, I went to the kitchen to make something to eat. I descended the stairs and turned into the family room. What I saw would be forever burned into my mind, however. My parents were lying on the ground, naked and covered in blood. They were mutilated to near unidentifiable states. Their limbs were removed and placed next to their bodies, and their heads were placed on their chests facing me. The most unsettling part was their expressions. They were smiling, as though they were happy to see me. I vomited and sobbed there in the family room. I didn't know what had happened. They didn't even live with me at the time. I was a mess. Then I saw it. A door that was never there before. A door with a large 8 scrawled on it in blood. I was still in the house. I was standing in my family room, but I was in room 7. The faces of my parents smiled wider as I realized this. They weren't my parents. They couldn't be. But they looked exactly like them. The door marked 8 was across the room, behind the mutilated bodies in front of me. I knew I had to move on, but at that moment I gave up. The smiling faces tore into my mind. They grounded me where I stood. I vomited again and nearly collapsed. Then the hum returned. It was louder than ever, and it filled the house and shook the walls. The hum compelled me to walk. I began to walk, slowly making my way closer to the door and the bodies. I could barely stand, let alone walk, and the closer I got to my parents, the closer I came to suicide. The walls were now shaking so hard it seemed as though they were going to crumble, but the faces still smiled at me. As I inched closer, their eyes followed. I was now between the 2 bodies, a few feet away from the door. The dismembered hands clawed their way across the carpet towards me, all while the faces continued to stare. New terror washed over me, and I walked faster. I didn't want to hear them speak. I didn't want the voices to match those of my parents. They began to open their mouths, and the hands were inches from my feet. In a dash of desperation, I lunged toward the door, threw it open, and slammed it behind me. Room 8. I was done. After what I had just experienced, I knew there wasn't anything else this fucking house could throw at me that I couldn't live through. There was nothing short of the fires of hell that I wasn't ready for. Unfortunately, I underestimated the abilities of NoEnd house. Unfortunately, things got more disturbing, more terrifying, and more unspeakable in room 8. I still have trouble believing what I saw in room 8. Again, the room was a carbon copy of rooms 3 and 6, but sitting in the usually empty chair was a man. After a few seconds of disbelief, my mind finally accepted the fact that the man sitting in the chair was me. Not someone who looked like me. It was David Williams. I walked closer. I had to get a better look, even though I was sure of it. He looked up at me, and I noticed tears in his eyes. Please? Please don't do it. Please don't hurt me. What? I asked. Who are you? I'm not going to hurt you. Yes, you are. He was sobbing now. You're going to hurt me, and I don't want you to. He sat in the chair with his legs up and began rocking back and forth. It was actually pretty pathetic looking, especially since he was me, identical in every way. Look, listen, who are you? I was now only a few feet from my doppelganger. It was the weirdest experience yet, standing there talking to myself. I wasn't scared, but I would be soon. Why are you... You're going to hurt me. You're going to hurt me. If you want to leave, you're going to hurt me. Why are you saying this? Just calm down, alright? Let's try and figure this... And then I saw it. The David sitting down was wearing the same clothes as me, except for a small red patch on his shirt, embroidered with the number 9. You're going to hurt me. You're going to hurt me. Please don't. You're going to hurt me. My eyes didn't leave that small number on his chest. I knew exactly what it was. The first few doors were plain and simple, but after a while they got a little more ambiguous. 7 was scratched into the wall by my own hands. 8 was marked in blood above the bodies of my parents. But 9... This was on a person. A living person. Worse still, it was on a person that looked exactly like me. David? I had to ask. Yes, you're going to hurt me. You're going to hurt me. He continued to sob and rock. He answered to David. He was me, right down to the voice. But that 9... I paced around for a few minutes while he sobbed in his chair. The room had no door, and similarly to room 6, the door I came through was gone. For some reason I assumed that scratching would get me nowhere this time. I studied the walls and floor around the chair, sticking my head underneath and seeing if anything was below. Unfortunately, there was. Below the chair was a knife. Attached was a tag that read, "To David, from management." The feeling in my stomach as I read that tag was something sinister. I wanted to throw up, and the last thing I wanted to do was remove that knife from under that chair. The other David was still sobbing uncontrollably. My mind was spinning into an attic of unanswerable questions. Who put this here? And how did they get my name? Not to mention the fact that as I knelt on the cold wood floor, I also sat in that chair, sobbing in protest of being hurt by myself. It was all too much to process. The house and the management had been playing with me this whole time. My thoughts for some reason turned to Peter and whether or not he got this far. If he did, he met with a Peter Terry sobbing in this chair, rocking back and forth. I shook those thoughts out of my head. They didn't matter. I took the knife from under the chair and immediately the other David went quiet. "David?" he said in my voice. "What do you think you're going to do?" I lifted myself from the ground and clenched the knife in my hand. "I'm going to get out of here." David was still sitting in the chair, though he was very calm now. He looked up at me with a slight grin. I couldn't tell if he was going to laugh or strangle me. Slowly, he got up from the chair and stood, facing me. It was uncanny. His height and even the way he stood matched me. I felt the rubber hilt of the knife in my hand and gripped it tighter. I don't know what I was planning on doing with it, but I had a feeling I was going to need it. "Now," his voice was slightly deeper than my own, "I'm going to hurt you. I'm going to hurt you, and I'm going to keep you here." I didn't respond. I just lunged and tackled him to the ground. I had mounted him and looked down, knife poised and ready. He looked up at me, terrified. It was like I was looking in a mirror. Then the hum returned, low and distant, though I still felt it deep in my body. David looked up at me as I looked down at myself. The hum was getting louder, and I felt something inside me snap. With one motion, I slammed the knife into the patch on his chest and ripped down. Blackness fell on the room, and I was falling. The darkness around me was like nothing I had experienced up to that point. Room 4 was dark, but it didn't come close to what was completely engulfing me. I wasn't even sure if I was falling after a while. I felt weightless, covered in dark. Then a deep sadness came over me. I felt lost, depressed, suicidal. The sight of my parents entered my mind. I knew it wasn't real, but I had seen it. And the mind has trouble differentiating between what is real and what isn't. The sadness only deepened. I was in room 9 for what seemed like days, the final room. And that's exactly what it was. The end. NoEnd house had an end, and I had reached it. At that moment, I gave up. I knew I would be in that in-between state forever, accompanied by nothing but darkness. Not even the hum was there to keep me sane. I had lost all senses. I couldn't feel myself. I couldn't hear anything. Sight was completely useless here. I searched for a taste in my mouth and felt nothing. I felt disembodied and completely lost. I knew where I was. This was hell. Room 9 was hell. Then it happened. A light. One of those stereotypical lights at the end of the tunnel. I felt ground come up from below me and I was standing. After a moment or two of gathering my thoughts and senses, I slowly walked toward that light. As I approached the light, it took form. It was a vertical slit down the side of an unmarked door. I slowly walked through the door and found myself back where I started, the lobby of NoEnd house. It was exactly how I left it, still empty, still decorated with childish Halloween decorations. After everything that had happened that night, I was still wary of where I was. After a few moments of normalcy, I looked around the place trying to find anything different. On the desk was a plain white envelope with my name handwritten on it. Immensely curious, yet still cautious, I mustered up the courage to open the envelope. Inside was a letter, again handwritten. David Williams. Congratulations! You have made it to the end of NoEnd house. Please accept this prize as a token of great achievement. Yours forever, Management. With the letter were 5 $100 bills. I couldn't stop laughing. I laughed for what seemed like hours. I laughed as I walked out to my car, and laughed as I drove home. I laughed as I pulled into my driveway. I laughed as I opened my front door to my house, and laughed as I saw the small 10 etched into the wood.
The house was inside the house!
Oh,
He was my
God.
doppelganger.
I should have foreseen that. So, yeah, that's a, that's one of the more popular ones. Slightly longer than I expected it to be, but still.
It's not even over, either. It can end right there, but, it keeps going.
Oh, there is more to it?
Yes. See at the bottom?
Oh, gosh.
Bottom right there says next.
Oh my gosh. Golly gee. Oh, yeah, heckin' tricksters, you. I didn't know there were more
The
chapters.
story
to
has
the
no
thing.
end.
Golly gee willikers. Oh, there's a sequel, I see. NoEnd House 2.
And there's
How many
NoEnd
of them?
House 3. I think NoEnd House 3 is the last one.
Or is it? Dun dun dun!
Hello?
Hello.
Yeah,
Yes, hello.
Okay, yeah. Audio issue, sorry.
Yeah, it happens.
Wow.
Did you enjoy it?
Well, okay. Am I allowed to be critical? Okay, so I liked it, but I feel like it could have been a lot shorter.
Yes.
And I also feel like this guy was definitely pitching a movie.
Well, I mean, it has been made into a season of a TV series at this point.
Well, all right, but I mean, there is a Stephen King movie called 1408, with like John Cusack and Samuel Jackson. It reminded me a little bit of that. And then there was also this movie, also with John Cusack. I can't give any of it. I think it was called Identity, and I can't give any of it away because it would spoil it. But it reminded me of that too in certain ways. So
Yes, it could have been shorter. There were some writing errors, some of which I corrected as I went along. And there were some unusual choices there, but yes. I like the concept. The execution is imperfect, but it's still an enjoyable one to me.
Yeah,
and I like how it ends.
Which it does.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah, definitely. It definitely ends. The story has concluded. There is no more to it.
Game over. Usually win.
Jonas, how did his friend tell him about the thing? If his friend supposedly went through it, like.
Well, okay, that's the other thing that I want to know, because, like, they talk about
start
people...
out in his friend's, like, room 6? Is that the existence he was in?
Well, but here's the thing that the writing bugs me about. Now we're ranting about it. They talk about people making it through the house or being unable to make it through the house and all that other stuff, but they're never presented at any point with the option to quit. Like, there's never an exit, you know? Like, there are some actual, extreme haunted houses out there, that are rather infamous, but they do provide you an option to quit, some of them at least, if you can't take it. And this place made a big deal out of, you know, oh, nobody's finished it, but the way it's presented, you're not given a choice but to finish it. You know, there's no chicken exit.
Yeah. I guess the idea is that nobody's finished it, and that every single person that's gone into it has gone insane or died.
I mean, I guess, but again, as you say, that raises the question about what happened to his friend. You know, and how he got the message from his friend. I mean, granted, his friend did message him on IM instead of in person, but does that mean the house has an AIM account? Like,
the
thing was coming from inside the house.
I mean, the way I choose to interpret it, and you know, you don't have to buy into this, is that he was crazy to begin with. The house was inside his head.
So you think he was insane from the beginning?
Yeah. That's my take. But I mean, who knows?
Well, you know, Jonas, your take is just as valid as anyone else's.
I thought you were going to say, you know, your take is bullshit.
I mean, I was tempted to say that, yes, but I decided to be nice.
True.
Okay, I'm just funning with you, Jonas. I'm just funning with you.
Ty said, I remember one that offered $10K if they could finish, but they have a waiver saying they can do whatever they want to you.
Yeah, that's called the, what is that thing called? Like, McCarney Manor or something like that? It is, like, yeah, it is, like, way beyond the pale, in my opinion. Like, I personally don't think it should be legal.
I want to see you do that, because you've always told me that you don't get spooked by stuff.
Yeah, but, like, listen, this isn't like a spook house. This is like we put you through the experience you would have if you were kidnapped and held by a serial killer. Except
so it's basically Saw role-playing.
Oh my god.
Yeah, like, they will...
It's more like light torture than it is terror.
Oh,
not even sure. Light. Like, they do
medium
to the
torture.
limit of, like, doing, medium torture, yeah. Like, they go to the limit of doing, like, actual physical harm to you, like irreversible harm.
I was gonna say, and like $10,000 does not cover a lot of medical bills. If they can do it's literally anything.
Yeah, like this is the kind of thing that you come out with lifelong trauma from. Like, it's not fun. I don't know why anyone would agree to it.
We're a very strange species, aren't we?
Yeah.
Anyway,
do we want to do anything else, or do we want to call it here? It is the spooky ween itself, so if we wanted to go a little long, this would be the night to do it. But also, if we don't want to, it's, you know, this is a good time to call it, since, you know, it's after midnight.
I can push it.
I don't know what you just said, but I'm giving you a thumbs
I
up.
can push it. We can
Okay.
go. We can stay up like.
At first, I thought you said I call bullshit, and I was like,
Okay, so I call bullshit. Hey, okay. I call
like in his
bullshit.
normal GC way of like mispronouncing words ever so slightly.
Oh, stop! You can all swerve. There.
You said it, DC.
Yeah.
I'm about to say dwarf, but I said swarf. Yeah, there you go.
And the swarf was coming from inside the dwarf!
Alright.
I see you are a practitioner of the Schwartz.
We could try Jonas's idea of like doing a round robin, make one up, one or two sentences at a time.
Well, it's up to Rick. I mean,
We can do
Rick's
that.
fine.
Let's do that.
You make your call.
Let's do that.
Rick's wants to do it.
Okay, so
All
what are we
right.
doing?
Be prepared, everyone. This could get real stupid real quick.
All right. Before we do that, we should probably set a time limit or something.
I mean,
Like-
we could literally do it like the improv exercise where we do it one word at a time.
No.
Well, I mean that would be a bit much.
Okay,
But
fine.
Once we can do one
I
sentence.
don't think that works too well on a VoIP. If we're all in person, I think that works, but...
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
Okay, so how does this work?
Well, we go in roster order, and we tell a creepypasta together, and we each make up a sentence, and whatever we're saying has to like follow from the previous sentence. So it's like you go first, GC, and then I go, and then Miller goes. And we keep going until we've ended the story. Like I said, we should probably set a time limit, maybe.
6 hours.
Yeah, 6 hours. I don't know, Rick. What do you think? 10 minutes, 15 minutes?
Aim for 10 minutes. Don't go over 20.
All right, let me see if I can start a timer in how do I set a timer in chat? Miller, do you know?
Huh?
Hang on, Twitch timer.
Miller's
chat.
like, what do I know? I'm just
All
a
right.
Miller.
Let's see.
It's the verb. I don't know nothing about nothing.
All right, okay. Never mind. It's complicated. I'll set a manual timer over here. What do you say? 15 minutes?
Timer.
You
Yeah,
ready?
sure.
Yeah,
why
set
not?
it to 15.
Okay, 15 minutes. Whenever you're ready,
Give you
GC.
15% or less on car insurance.
Okay, so see here.
All right, ready, folks? Start the timer now.
Once upon a time,
Needs to be a
That
full
helps.
sentence. Come on.
Yeah,
Oh,
it has to be.
once upon a time there was a creepypasta on Twitch, and okay, once upon a time there was a creepypasta on Twitch, and a bunch of dorks decide to read it live to the audience. But suddenly,
All right. But suddenly, it became apparent to everyone in the Twitch chat that the channel they were watching was not actually registered with Twitch. Therefore, it could not be a real channel.
Several had heard the name years before whispered on Justin TV, but the channel had never carried over to Twitch. Nobody knew where it came from.
The channel, for some reason...
Stoker.
Rick, it's Rick.
Sorry.
People had been linked to this chat through a mysterious link that has been passed around on Discord.
Some had said that they had found the link on a mysterious site called Twitter, but there were no records of this site anywhere. It had never been.
where did this link come from? The audience thought it was never explained, or at least hinted that it was anything but innocent. As we started to look at the link and he clicked on it, suddenly manifested a particular kind of sentence, as to say.
The sentence couldn't be described in any known language. In fact, you couldn't even look at it without going utterly insane. It was that it was that weird.
Aside from the nonsensical sentence, there was a timer on the stream. It counted down to the witching hour on Hallows Eve.
The witching hour happened to be 30 minutes past midnight, which is kind of weird.
But you know how time zones are. These things get very bizarre. As you were watching the timer tick down moment by moment, second by second, that's when you, the audience, realized
What's going on in there? Someone heard in the background from Twitch. You all talking spooky stories in this skeleton closet? And GC was like, "No, Mother, this is just a creepypasta." And then the audience started laughing. And as I turned towards the audience, I said, Watch out, it's Halloween."
The audience and the Twitch host decided to go trick or treating. Little did they realize that the house they were trick or treating at was very hungry, and the door opened and swallowed them all.
Okay. They fell into the gullet of the house, washed away by sewer water into the bowels below.
This is just like that movie Monster House, said one of them, who was promptly digested.
Stoker's last words were, I never got around to seeing that, but I always wanted to.
Maybe like that Halloween movie, GC said. But Stoker replied, "No, GC. I mean, go watch a real horror movie or something. Like that Friday the 13th thing you keep bragging on about."
Jonas had no useful commentary for the sheer insanity of the scenario had driven him insane, completely insane, just gibbering all over the place.
The raccoon was foaming at the mouth, gargling wildly at his insanity, despite the fact that he could not catch rabies. Everyone decided that he was in fact infected and quarantined him in the outhouse behind the house that had swallowed them.
Aww.
Somehow. Anyway, this was all broadcast live on Twitch through aforementioned mysterious link to a channel that does not actually exist. And the audience watched all this happening in real time, and they were horrified by it.
Booga booga booga, booga boo, booga boo, booga.
I tried to translate this message, and it basically came out as, "Halloween's the night of spook. Why aren't you spooked, spooky spooks?" And I said, "Well, I'm trying to get spooked, but the spooks are not spooking tonight." As I looked at the chat, for somehow clicking on a link that just suddenly happened to manifest out of nowhere. And I'm like, wait a minute, that's not the link we posted earlier. Jonas?
Jonas stood there like a deer in headlights. His creative mind having great difficulty coming up with the next step in the story. He opened his mouth to attempt to provide some semblance of a following statement, and then horribly he was beheaded.
And him wielding now the bloody axe that had decapitated our raccoon friend was Richolas Griffin, horrible serial murderer.
Yes, I did it, said Richolas Griffin. I was the one who chopped off the raccoon's head, and I would do it again if it wasn't for you and your meddling kids.
Roar!
I just picked up the Holy Cross and said, "Fuck this, I'm getting out of here." As I ran up the tree and stood there all night, saying, "You guys are sick."
GC emerged as the clear protagonist in the story, of the unfolding creepypasta, because of his quick wits and skills and stuff.
He raised the commemorative 1911 that Leon Kennedy had personally given him to Richolas Griffin and aimed it square at the creature's head.
But Richolas had come prepared, for he held up a mirror and said into it 3 times, "Bloody Mary, Bloody Mary, Bloody Mary!" And then he turned the mirror towards GC, and Bloody Mary jumped out of the mirror and towards him in the tree.
Fortunately for GC, Bloody Mary had been hitting the bar really hard the night before and was still severely hungover. So she was moaning and crawling around the ground, but not very quickly.
Fortunately for GC, he did not anticipate that Dracula would jump out in the mirror and kill him. The end. He still got his blood.
Postscript. What sort of drinks did you have at the bar? Said GC to Bloody Mary. Bloody Mary just gave him a look.
Bloody Mary then scrolled through the photos on her phone to show herself the night before drinking Jack and Cokes the entire night.
Nice.
But then she scrolled over to the last image, which contained a video file of their meeting that had yet to have occurred.
Anyway, the audience who watched this all on the Twitch channel that does not exist will die in 5.5 days.
5.5 business days, not counting holidays, weekends, and, accounting for postage.
7 days, 7 weeks, 7 months, 7 years. That is the time of... Wait, not the devil, but it's the devil's father. Watch out. Twitchers as GC started to come back to life. He put his blanket on and everything. He said, for on the 7th night, in the 7th year, and well, I already said that, you will die to the devil's father.
Oh, the timer went off. That was 15 minutes. How about that?
That was the dumbest thing I've ever done.
This is usually how these things kind of go, so you have to expect that.
Yeah, but usually the first thing we got was GC read like 4.5 sentences, and we're just like, okay, I guess.
I never did these before, to be honest, so I don't know.
Have you ever played the game Once Upon a Time?
No.
Oh.
I really haven't. I'm sorry.
And everyone in the chat didn't know. Everyone in the chat didn't know what the hell to say.
I could tell. I'm sorry.
Gentlemen, thank you for humoring me in this little exercise.
Jonas, you're a monster.
I am. I was the real monster all along.
Now recount everything. We got swallowed by a house, and then Rick and GC had a fight.
And Rick
That
killed
was
me.
the most.
And
like,
it killed the audience with a bunch of legalese.
And then Gandalf the Grey and Gandalf the White.
Yeah.
The Holy Grail Black.
And somehow GC was getting violent on Halloween again for some reason, even though I'm supposed to be nice.
That's just
you see, everyone,
sort of thing
maybe
just
the real
reminds me.
violence was the friends we made along the way.
It reminds me of the card game Once Upon a Time. It's a storytelling card game where you're basically telling a fairy tale, and you want to be the one who ends the fairy tale. Because you have in your hand the ending that you're supposed to get to. But in order to play it, you first have to have element cards in your hand, and these elements have to play into the story. But anytime when someone is telling the story and you have an element that matches something that they mention, you can play that card and steal the story from them to continue telling it.
Too bad that you can't play that online. That sounds like fun.
It's a great game. I like that.
like something that could be on like Tabletop Simulator.
Yeah.
Yeah, we keep it simple down. We keep it simple down here. We never do anything that's outside of tradition. That's my fault, though. Jeez. That's
What's the name of that game again?
Once Upon a Time.
Once Upon a Time card game. It's online. Oh my god. Tell me it's online.
Once Upon a Time is on Lime.
Yeah.
Only thing I knew about the game when we were playing, doing it, was that it was improv Halloween night. That's basically what I got out of it.
We made up some very weird stories. Just improving all the way through this, through games like this.
I tried to come up with something, but jeez.
It's a little less weird than what we did here because people typically will spend like 1 to 10 minutes on a segment of the story instead of just one sentence at a time.
Once upon a time, there was a brown dog that ran out of batteries for his Wiimote.
Oh, that is a horror story.
Wait, that sounds like Peanut.
Yes, that's the first one. That's right. Am I remembering that correctly?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's how it all started. A dog without his Wii remote.
Yeah. I thought I'll start with a mouse. Anyway, this has been a ton of fun. Thank you, all of you. And thank you in the audience. This has just been fantastic.
Yeah.
Yes, audience, you are the real protagonists.
You're
okay?
the real killers.
You're the...
This Halloween has actually been pretty good. Its spirits are reignited. Everybody joined their Halloween nights. I bless you all and chat tonight.
Yeah, what GC said.
And now you must die. Anyway.
You must die.
Are you the host of the the murder trivia party? Come on.
Listen, the real trivia murder party was the murder that we, the friends that we killed,
It was you, Stoker.
The improv that we just
And all
did.
Yay!
Is thanks to you, chat. You and your glorious contributions with your follows and your subs and your Patreon support and your all the things. We want to thank you all for coming out tonight again. I'd like to give a little bit of a chance for everyone in this chat here to do a shout out and what they're doing right now.
Yeah.
Probably getting ready for bed.
Yeah, I'm
And-
drinking. I'm drinking coffee far too late and working on
Literally
stuff.
this second. I mean, bigger picture.
Okay.
Hey, I passed my hot chocolate for this. Jonas.
We're probably going to be doing overtime, Halloween overtime tomorrow because Boxer made another House Pets Quiplash
Right.
with the Halloween questions prompts.
Works for me.
Well, I mean, you know, basically, for me, the way my years work is January through August is Halloween, or is pre-Halloween, rather. September is Halloween. October is Ultra Halloween. November is the post-Halloween cool-down. December is Christmas, and then it's Halloween again.
Post Halloween depression.
Well, November is
There's
also
no
summer.
Halloween depression. Halloween is with us always.
Yeah.
Halloween will never go away, even if it's not here.
Even if we try, even if we exercise it.
What were you about to say about November, Jonas?
I think November is also somebody's birthday.
Yes, it is somebody's birthday. That person's birthday is coming up. Before this week is over, no, that person is not going to mention their specific age at this present time.
Aww.
November is the month of remembering. Yeah.
59 years old. Wow, I can't believe it. Sorry, I should do a more ridiculous number. 99 years old. I can't believe it.
I can't
I know you're a
believe
vampire.
Stoker is 10.
384 years old. I can't believe Stoker's 384 years old.
That seems a little young.
Vampires are usually a lot older than that. Jeez.
Yeah. I can't believe Stoker is the oldest vampire in Louisiana.
Yeah, no kidding.
I don't know.
Canadian
All right.
vampires are like 200
Yeah,
years old. Jeez.
200 years ago, he got in on the voodoo doctor turf, and he's been just trying to make his own little niche ever since.
We have an understanding.
He said.
All right, y'all.
What? Yeah.
Jonas, are you chipmunking?
I was.
What have I
we should
told you
probably.
about chipmunking?
Very well. Fine.
This
All
song
right.
does not belong to the chipmunks.
There.
All right.
What if it did, though?
Chipmunks are a cover band. No song should
We
belong
should
to
probably
them.
wrap this up.
No,
All
we're
right.
just going to talk about Alvin and the Chipmunks for 3 more hours.
It just passed 12:30. We can pass it out now. It was all
All right. Good night, everybody. Thank
Yes,
you for coming.
I declare this meeting of the Midnight Society closed.
All right.
And we're all dead. Have a good night.
Happy Halloween, folks.
Good
Happy
night.
Halloween. Bye.
Happy Halloween.
Bye. 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 Bye.
Hurry back. Hurry back.